Hi guys. Tonight we are standing right at the edge of daylight, watching it thin and fade as if someone is slowly turning down a dimmer switch on the world itself. You are still outside, and the last warmth of the sun lingers weakly on your skin, but you can already feel it slipping away. The sky doesn't go dark all at once. It hesitates. Blue deepens into grey, grey into something heavier, and then almost without ceremony night settles in. No bulbs flicker on. No streetlights hum to life. Darkness simply arrives. Full and final. You probably won't survive this. At least, not comfortably. Because once the sun disappears in the Middle Ages, it takes with it far more than light. It steals time, safety, productivity, and certainty. Night is not a pause button. It is a condition you must endure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step fully into this world where night is not decorative or cozy, but absolute. You begin to understand quickly that medieval evenings are short by design. People move faster now. Footsteps pick up. Voices sharpen with urgency. Animals are herded closer. Doors are checked twice. This isn't panic, it's routine. A mainstream historical reality is that most medieval people structured their entire day around available daylight. Not clocks. Work stretched and shrank with the seasons. But nightfall was always non-negotiable. You feel it in your body before you fully register it in your mind. Sight weakens first. Colors flatten. Faces blur. Peripheral vision becomes unreliable. You realize how much modern life depends on light without ever asking permission. Here, light is a resource, not a guarantee. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, then goes quiet. Chickens have already settled, their murmuring replaced by an odd stillness. The air itself seems to thicken. Historians still argue whether medieval people feared darkness itself, or simply respected it as a force that demanded caution rather than courage. Standing here now, you suspect it's both. As the last usable light drains from the sky, the world narrows. Your vision drops to what's directly in front of you, your feet, the ground, the shape of a doorway. Beyond that is guesswork. The stars, when they appear, offer beauty but very little help. Moonlight, when you're lucky enough to have it, turns everything silver and deceptive, creating shadows that move when nothing else does. You head indoors. Because everyone does. Medieval nightlife is overwhelmingly indoor life. Houses are not built for comfort so much as survival. Thick walls, small openings, low ceilings. These choices weren't aesthetic. They were defensive against cold, against wind, against the darkness itself. A quirky but well-documented tidbit is that many medieval windows were intentionally narrow slits, not just for defense against attack, but to minimize heat loss and control smoke movement once fires were lit. Inside, the transition is jarring. Outdoors was dim. Indoors is something else entirely. Without fire, the interior is a pocket of near-total blackness. Your eyes strain, searching for edges, for shapes, for reassurance that the room still exists. You shuffle carefully, guided more by memory than sight. Then fire appears. A spark, a hiss, a low crackle. Suddenly the room exists again, but only partially. Fire does not illuminate evenly. It creates islands of visibility surrounded by shadow. Faces glow and then vanish as people shift. Walls flicker in and out of existence. The ceiling disappears altogether, swallowed by darkness and smoke. Fire becomes the anchor of the evening. It is light, warmth, protection, and risk compressed into one trembling source. This is another mainstream fact. Open hearths were central to medieval domestic life, especially at night. But what textbooks rarely convey is how mentally exhausting it is to rely on a single flame for so many needs at once. You feel your shoulders drop slightly as warmth reaches you. The day's tension loosens. Yet at the same time, you can't stop watching the fire. Everyone watches it. Sparks jump. Embers shift. A single mistake could turn this refuge into a death trap. Fire gives. But it also threatens. As people settle around the hearth, conversation softens. Night changes voices. There's less shouting now. More murmuring. Words are chosen carefully because they don't travel far in low light. Silence stretches longer between sentences. The rhythm slows. You notice something else too, the smell. Smoke clings to everything. Hair, clothes, skin. It seeps into bedding and wood and memory. This is not the clean scent of a modern fireplace. It's damp wood, old ash, animal fat, and whatever else was burned that day. A fringe historical detail that often surprises people is that medieval households sometimes burned dried animal dung when wood was scarce, especially in treeless regions. The smell is unforgettable. Time behaves differently now, without artificial light. Evening is not something to fill endlessly. There are no distractions waiting to be turned on. You don't scroll. You don't binge. You simply exist until tiredness claims you. Historians still debate whether medieval people experienced time as slower, or whether our modern acceleration simply makes the past feel sluggish by comparison. Sitting here, watching flames pulse and shrink, you feel time thicken, almost syrup-like. Outside, darkness presses against the walls. You are keenly aware of what you cannot see. Forest edges, empty roads, the possibility of strangers, or animals, or nothing at all. Sometimes the absence itself is the most unsettling part. You listen. Night sharpens hearing. Every creak of wood sounds intentional. Every gust of wind feels like a presence. Medieval night is loud in small ways. Mice. Rafters settling. A cough from across the room. Somewhere far off. A bell marks a prayer hour you don't quite understand yet. There's no clear boundary between evening and night. One slides into the other gently, almost politely. Eventually, someone yawns. Another shifts closer to the fire. The flame is adjusted, lowered, coaxed to last just a bit longer. Candles, if they exist here at all, are not lit casually. They are saved, used sparingly. Light is money, and money burns fast. As your body begins to relax, you realize something quietly unsettling. Once you lie down, once the fire dims, once the room goes dark again, there will be no escape from night until morning. No switch, no override, just darkness, patience, and whatever thoughts decide to surface when there is nothing left to look at. And so, without announcement, medieval night truly begins. Darkness deepens fully now, and with it comes a noticeable change in sound. During the day, noise spills freely. Tools strike wood and stone. Voices carry across fields. Animals announce themselves constantly. At night, all of that contracts. Sound no longer spreads outward. It sinks inward. You become aware not of what is loud, but of what is missing. The village exhales. That is the best way to describe it. Doors close. Shutters are pulled tight. The last conversations taper off into murmurs. What remains is not silence. Exactly. But a careful quiet. You hear wind moving through uneven roof thatch. You hear the distant cough of someone who did not quite beat the cold. You hear your own breathing more clearly than you would like. A well-established historical fact is that medieval communities actively discouraged noise after nightfall, not out of courtesy, but necessity. Sound attracted attention. Attention invited trouble. Without light, you cannot easily tell whether a noise is harmless or dangerous. So the safest rule is to create as little noise as possible yourself. Quiet becomes a form of protection. You feel this discipline settling into your posture. Movements grow deliberate. Footsteps are placed carefully. Even the fire is treated with respect, coaxed rather than fed aggressively. Flames snap too loudly when they are overworked. Outside, the night does not feel empty. It feels occupied. The darkness seems to listen. You realize that much of medieval fear of night was not fear of monsters, but fear of not knowing who or what was nearby. Roads after dark belong to uncertainty. A single traveler could be a pilgrim, a messenger, a thief, or something worse. Historians still argue whether crime truly increased at night in medieval settlements, or whether people simply perceived it as more dangerous because of reduced visibility. Sitting here, you suspect perception alone would be enough. Animals behave differently now. Dogs curl closer to doorways. Livestock shift and snort in their enclosures. Rats become bolder. You hear the faint scratch of movement behind walls and beneath floors. A fringe but widely noted detail is that medieval homes were never truly sealed. Gaps were inevitable. Nighttime belonged to creatures small enough to exploit them. The air cools quickly once the fire is reduced. Heat does not linger the way it does in modern buildings. Stone and earth absorb warmth slowly and release it just as slowly. But wood gives up heat almost immediately. You wrap yourself tighter, noticing how cold sneaks in through ankles and wrists first. Conversation, when it happens, changes tone. People speak in shorter phrases. Stories are told more softly, often repeated ones. Familiar words are comforting in the dark. There is less appetite for novelty now. Night is not the time for surprises. You notice how faces look different by firelight. Features stretch and compress. Eyes reflect flame and appear brighter than they are. Shadows exaggerate expressions. Someone who looked ordinary by day seems suddenly severe. Another seems kinder. Fire reshapes people as much as it reshapes rooms. This is where superstition finds fertile ground. Shapes shift. Sounds lack clear sources. It becomes easy to imagine intention where there is none. Medieval folklore thrived in these hours. Not because people were foolish, but because their sensory information was incomplete. When you cannot see clearly, the mind fills gaps aggressively. There is a scholarly debate about whether medieval people truly believed in every spirit and omen recorded in folklore, or whether such stories functioned more as explanations for anxiety and danger. In this half-light, belief feels less like a choice and more like a natural response to uncertainty. You hear a bell in the distance. Not loud, but steady. It marks a religious hour. Time at night is measured differently. Without clocks, without light. The community relies on sound. Bells divide darkness into manageable segments. They reassure you that the world is still structured, still watched. Someone near you murmurs a prayer, quietly enough that it blends with the crackle of embers. Religion does not sleep simply because people do. Night is full of obligations, spiritual if not physical. Eventually, even conversation fades, not abruptly. It thins. A pause stretches too long. No one rushes to fill it. Silence becomes acceptable, even welcome. You realize how tiring darkness can be. Your eyes ache from trying to see. Your body feels heavier. This is not boredom. It is a different rhythm asserting itself. The fire is allowed to sink lower. Flames shrink into glowing coals. Light pulls inward, collapsing toward the hearth. Corners vanish. The room simplifies into warmth at the center and darkness everywhere else. You understand now that medieval night is not dramatic. It does not roar or threaten openly. It presses gently but relentlessly. It asks you to slow down, to listen more than you speak, to accept that not everything can be seen or solved until morning. And so you remain still, wrapped in quiet, letting the darkness finish what sunset began. As the night settles deeper, you become aware of how deliberately these homes are shaped for darkness. Medieval houses do not fight the night. They accept it, accommodate it, and in many ways, cooperate with it. You stand inside a space that was never meant to be bright after sunset. It was meant to be contained. The walls around you are thick, sometimes shockingly so. Stone, packed earth, heavy timber. These materials serve one primary purpose at night, and it is not comfort. They slow loss. Heat leaks out reluctantly. Cold pushes in just as slowly. This way of building was common across much of medieval Europe. Regardless of wealth, even modest homes followed the same logic, just with cruder materials. Windows, if the house has them at all, are small and awkwardly placed. They sit high or narrow. More suggestion than opening. During the day, they admit just enough light to work by. At night, they do almost nothing. Glass is rare and expensive. Oiled cloth or animal horn might cover the opening, blurring the outside world into a dull haze even before darkness arrives. When night comes, the window stops being a feature and becomes a liability, a place where cold and sound might slip through. You notice how low the ceiling feels. Smoke stains darken the beams above your head. The roof presses downward, not physically, but psychologically. This is not a space designed for wandering or pacing. It encourages stillness, sitting, lying down, conserving energy. There is an odd intimacy to it. Darkness shrinks space. Rooms that feel adequate by day feel crowded by night. People sit closer, not only for warmth, but because there is nowhere else to go. The edges of the room have vanished. Only the center remains. One thing records from the period suggest clearly is that medieval interiors were rarely quiet in a modern sense. Even at night, houses creaked, settled, breathed. Wood contracts as temperatures drop. Thatch rustles softly above. Somewhere, moisture drips. You cannot escape the sound of the building itself. It is alive around you. Less often mentioned is how flexible these spaces were. A single room might serve as kitchen, workshop, sleeping area, and storage. At night, all of those functions collapse into one shared purpose: shelter. Tools are pushed aside. Food is secured. Bedding is laid out wherever there is space near warmth. The house transforms, not by moving walls, but by shifting priorities. You feel the floor beneath you. Dirt in poorer homes, rough planks in wealthier ones. Cold rises upward relentlessly. Straw, rushes, or simple mats attempt to interrupt that cold, but only partially. This is why benches, stools, and beds are lifted off the ground whenever possible. Elevation matters. Even a small distance from the floor can mean the difference between tolerable cold and bone-deep chill. There is a curious detail that appears again and again in household accounts. People slept with their clothes on far more often than modern imagination allows. Not because they lacked privacy or modesty, but because undressing wasted warmth. Layers stayed on. Cloaks doubled as blankets. Hoods were pulled tight even in bed. The idea of pajamas would have felt absurd here. Firelight reveals how walls are used. Hooks hold tools. Shelves carry everyday objects. Nothing is decorative. Everything must justify its presence. At night, unnecessary items become obstacles. Things you might trip over or knock into flame. Order is not about neatness. It is about survival. You reach out and touch the wall. It is cool. Even near the hearth, stone absorbs heat slowly and releases it grudgingly. By morning, it will still be cold. Medieval builders understood this trade-off well. Thick walls protect against extremes, but they never truly feel warm. There is disagreement among modern historians about whether people perceived these homes as oppressive or comforting. Some argue that familiarity softened the darkness, that people felt safer, enclosed by heavy walls. Others suggest that constant shadow and smoke created low-level stress that never fully lifted. Sitting here now, you feel both reactions at once. The house protects you from the outside, but it also traps you with your thoughts. Smell becomes more noticeable the longer you sit still. Smoke clings to every surface. Dampness rises from the floor. Animals, even if kept outside, leave traces behind. Food smells linger longer at night. unchallenged by fresh air. The house smells lived in, not cleaned. You become aware of how little separation exists between human life and the building itself. Walls are not barriers so much as membranes. You hear voices from nearby homes. Muffled, but recognizable. A cough. A baby stirring. Night binds the community together through shared vulnerability. The house creaks again. Louder this time. You freeze for a moment. Instinctively. Is it wind? Wood? Shifting something else? Without light. Certainty is delayed. You wait. The sound does not repeat. Your body relaxes slightly. This small cycle repeats many times each night. Tension. Pause. Release. You realize that medieval homes teach patience. They do not reward quick movement or impulsive action. Everything takes effort. Even standing requires thought. You memorize paths through the room so you can move without sight. You learn where the hearth ends and darkness begins. As the fire dims further, the room contracts again. Shadows claim more territory. Objects retreat into suggestion. The house feels less like a structure and more like a protective shell around fragile warmth. Here, in this darkness shaped by thick walls and low ceilings, you understand that medieval people did not conquer night. They negotiated with it, one enclosed space at a time. Fire becomes the quiet center of everything now. Not dramatically. Not with ceremony. But through simple necessity. As the room darkens and edges disappear, your attention is drawn again and again to the hearth. It is no longer just a feature of the house. It is the house. At least for the hours that matter. You sit close enough to feel its warmth on your shins. Too close and it stings. Too far, and the cold creeps back immediately. There is a narrow zone where comfort exists. And everyone learns to recognize it instinctively. Positions around the fire are adjusted constantly. A foot inches forward. A shoulder turns away. Heat is uneven and unpredictable, and you adapt without thinking. What is clear from surviving household records is that fire structured medieval evenings more than any written schedule ever could. When the fire was strong, people stayed awake. When it weakened, bodies began to surrender to sleep. Flame-controlled time. The fire itself is never left unattended. Someone always watches it, even if only half-consciously. Eyes drift toward it again and again. Embers are nudged. A log is repositioned. Sparks are discouraged. Fire gives life, but it also demands supervision. One careless moment could mean disaster, especially in homes packed tightly together. There is an odd intimacy in this shared vigilance. Everyone depends on the same flame. Children are warned away from it. Older hands tend it. Knowledge passes quietly. Learned through repetition rather than instruction. You do not need to be told how dangerous fire is. You can feel it. Smoke curls upward. Slow and persistent. It does not rise cleanly. It hesitates, spreads, then finds its way out through a hole in the roof or a crude chimney if one exists. Many homes do not have proper chimneys at all. Smoke simply fills the upper space of the room before escaping gradually. Eyes water. Throats itch. This discomfort is so normal that it barely registers. A lesser-known detail emerges from medical writings of the time. Chronic smoke exposure was so common that it shaped medieval health in subtle ways. Persistent coughs, irritated eyes, and shortened breath were accepted parts of life, not ailments to be solved. Night, with its longer hours by the fire, made these effects more noticeable. The firelight plays tricks. Faces glow amber, then fade. Hands seem larger, then smaller. Shadows stretch and collapse as flames shift. You understand how stories grow in this environment. The fire animates everything. A still object appears to move. A moving object seems alive. There is disagreement among historians about how much storytelling actually happened around the hearth on ordinary nights. Some argue that evenings were filled with tales, songs, and shared memory. Others suggest fatigue limited conversation more often than imagination. Sitting here, you sense that both are true. depending on the night, the season, and the people present. Tonight feels quieter. The day has taken its toll. Words come slowly. Someone begins a familiar story, then abandons it halfway through. No one presses them to continue. Silence settles again, punctuated by the gentle pop of burning wood. Fire also dictates smell. Resin from logs, old ash, grease from cooking earlier in the day. These scents layer over one another and sink into fabric and hair. They are not unpleasant, just constant. Even sleep will not fully escape them. You notice how tools gather near the hearth at night. Pots are stacked closer. Water is kept within reach. Anything needed quickly is placed where light exists. The rest of the room becomes irrelevant. Darkness claims it entirely. There is a quiet calculation happening now. How long should the fire last? Too much fuel, and it burns wastefully. Too little, and the room will grow unbearable before morning. Fuel is precious. Wood must be gathered, cut, and carried. Each log represents labor already spent. In some regions, especially where forests are scarce, people burn alternatives. Peat, dried grasses, even animal dung. These fuels burn differently, producing different heat and smoke. You feel the difference immediately. Some give steady warmth. Others smolder and fill the room with sharp, lingering scent. Choices made earlier in the day shape comfort now. There is no single agreement among scholars about how warm medieval homes actually were at night. Some suggest they were surprisingly tolerable when managed carefully. Others argue that constant cold stress was unavoidable. Your own experience suggests a compromise. Warmth exists, but only in small pockets, and only for limited time. As the fire settles into glowing coals, its character changes. Light softens. Heat becomes less aggressive. This is the moment when bodies relax most. Muscles unclench. Breathing deepens. The fire no longer demands attention. It invites rest. Someone stirs the embers gently, just enough to keep them alive. Flames flicker briefly, then retreat again. This small act feels ceremonial, even though it is entirely practical. It marks the transition from evening into true night. The fire will not last until dawn. Everyone knows this. Its job is not to banish night, only to ease entry into it. Eventually, darkness will reclaim the room fully, and you will lie down with whatever warmth remains trapped in your clothes and blankets. For now, though, you sit close to the fading glow, letting it hold the night at bay just a little longer. Light becomes something you start to measure without meaning to, not in brightness, but in cost. As the fire fades and shadows reclaim the room, you become aware of how little illumination remains and how carefully it must be handled. This is where candles enter the story. Not as symbols of romance or calm, but as calculated decisions. Candles are not common objects here. They are valuable, slow to make, and often reserved for moments that truly require them. Wax candles, made from beeswax, are especially prized. They burn cleaner and brighter than tallow. But beeswax takes time, skill, and healthy hives. Only wealthier households or religious institutions can afford to use them regularly. Most people rely on tallow candles made from animal fat. These burn unevenly, smoke more, and carry a distinct smell that lingers long after the flame is gone. You watch as a candle is lit. Carefully, deliberately, the wick catches slowly. Light blooms, but only modestly. This single flame does not fill the room. It creates a small circle of visibility. Nothing more. Faces near it become clear. Everything else remains uncertain. It is well established that medieval households rationed candle use tightly. Candles were not lit simply because night had arrived. They were lit for specific tasks: mending, eating, saying prayers, moving safely through a space that would otherwise be dangerous. Once the task was done, the candle was extinguished without hesitation. You notice how differently people behave around candlelight compared to firelight. Candles feel fragile. They demand stillness. A sudden movement could knock one over. A careless sleeve could catch flame. Candlelight encourages slow gestures and quiet concentration. A detail that rarely appears in popular descriptions of medieval life is how often people reused candle remnants. Stubs were saved. Melted wax was collected. New candles were formed from the remains of old ones. Nothing was wasted. Light, once consumed, was gone forever. The smell of tallow is unmistakable. Warm. Fatty. Faintly acrid. It clings to the air and to clothing. Over time, people grow accustomed to it. But at night, when other smells fade, it becomes more noticeable. This scent becomes part of the memory of evening. You realize that candlelight changes how you see faces. It is steadier than firelight, but dimmer. Shadows are sharper. Expressions feel more fixed. The room seems flatter, less alive. The fire danced. The candle observes. There is uncertainty among historians about how much reading actually took place at night in medieval homes. Some evidence suggests that literate individuals did read or write by candlelight. Other sources imply that eye strain and poor illumination made such activities rare. Sitting here now, you understand the difficulty. The flame wavers just enough to make sustained focus exhausting. Candles also shape social boundaries. Those who control access to light control activity. A household head decides when candles are lit and when they are put out. Children learn quickly that light is permission. When the candle goes dark, the day is over. In religious settings, candlelight takes on another role. It marks sacred time. It accompanies prayer. It signifies presence rather than utility. In homes, however, its meaning is simpler and more urgent. Light equals safety. Darkness equals risk. You notice how shadows pool behind furniture and along walls. Candlelight cannot reach corners. It reveals only what stands directly in its path. This partial vision heightens awareness of what remains unseen. You become careful where you step. You memorize the room again, this time by memory rather than sight. The flame shortens gradually as time passes. Wax drips slowly, forming hardened shapes at the base. Each drip feels like a reminder that light is being spent. No one mentions it, but everyone sees it. At some point, a quiet decision is made. The candle is snuffed. Darkness rushes back instantly, far more complete than before. Your eyes struggle to adjust. The room feels suddenly larger, emptier. There is debate among scholars about whether medieval people feared darkness more after using candlelight, or whether the contrast made them more comfortable with it. The moment the light vanishes, you feel a brief spike of unease. Then, just as quickly, your senses recalibrate. Darkness resumes its familiar weight. Without candle or flame, night asserts itself fully. You hear more, feel more, smell more. Light, for all its value, dulls certain senses. Its absence sharpens them. You lie back, aware that candles will not return tonight unless something demands them. Firelight is gone. Candlelight is gone. What remains is night in its purest form, and you accept it because there is no alternative. The loss of light brings urgency, and you feel it settle into your muscles the moment evening tips toward full darkness. Tasks that felt optional an hour ago now feel critical. There is a quiet scramble, not frantic, but focused. Night is coming, and certain things must be finished before it fully claims the space. You move with purpose. Hands work faster, conversations shorten. Everyone knows what still needs doing because these routines have been repeated hundreds of times before. Food must be secured, tools put away, animals checked, water drawn if it has not already been done. Darkness punishes forgetfulness. It is clear from household manuals and legal records that medieval evenings were structured around this final push of activity. The last light of day was precious, and it was never wasted casually. People learned to judge how much could realistically be accomplished before sight failed them. Experience taught restraint. You notice how memory replaces vision. You reach for objects without looking. guided by habit. The knife is always here, the bowl always there. This reliance on memory becomes second nature. Homes are organized for darkness as much as for daylight. One detail often overlooked is how communal this rush can be. In smaller households, everyone participates. Children carry kindling. Older hands check doors. In larger homes, tasks are divided more formally. But the shared awareness remains. Nightfall is a collective deadline. There is also a sense of calculation. Some chores are abandoned deliberately. Mending can wait. Cleaning can wait. Anything that risks injury without sufficient light is postponed until morning. This judgment keeps people alive. You feel the tension in your body ease slightly as each task is completed. A latch clicks into place. A pot is covered. A door is barred. These small sounds bring relief. They signal readiness. There is an open question among historians about how stressful this daily transition truly felt. Some argue that it created constant low-level anxiety. Others suggest that routine transformed urgency into comfort. Standing here now, you sense that repetition has softened the edge. The rush exists, but it is familiar. Outside, darkness deepens rapidly. Colors drain away completely. What remains is shape and movement, both unreliable. You resist the urge to look too long into it. Night beyond the threshold feels vast. Inside, the final adjustments continue. Bedding is arranged near the warmest part of the room. Extra layers are set aside within reach. Footwear is placed carefully, so it can be found again in the morning. These details matter more now than they did in daylight. A curious habit appears in many accounts. People often ate their final meal earlier than modern expectations would suggest, precisely to avoid handling knives and hot food in poor light. When evening meals did happen late, they were simple, requiring minimal preparation. Smell shifts again as activity increases briefly. Food, straw, damp wool, everything mingles. These scents will linger through the night, trapped by closed doors and still air. You sense the rhythm slowing again. The rush cannot last. Energy is finite, especially after a full day of labor. As tasks conclude, bodies settle, shoulders drop, breathing evens out. The fire is adjusted one last time, not to brighten the room, but to ensure it will not flare unexpectedly. Safety takes precedence over comfort. Someone spreads embers thinly. Someone else checks that sparks cannot escape. You notice how people avoid moving unnecessarily now. Every step carries risk. A stumble, a misplaced hand. Injury at night is far more dangerous than injury by day. Help is slower. Visibility is limited. Pain feels sharper when you cannot see its source. There is a lingering awareness of unfinished things. Something might have been forgotten. A tool left out. A door not fully secured. But second-guessing wastes energy. Once darkness fully settles, the day is considered done. There is disagreement among scholars about how often people broke these rules, choosing to work late despite the risks. Some evidence suggests necessity sometimes forced it. Other sources emphasize strong cultural norms against nighttime labor. Your own instincts lean toward caution. Darkness feels like a boundary, not an invitation. As the final traces of activity fade, the house enters a different state. It feels less like a workplace and more like a refuge. The noise level drops. Movements become rare. Night has been acknowledged. You lie down, aware that the day has ended not with ceremony, but with acceptance. There is comfort in that. Tomorrow will bring light again. For now, rest is the priority, and so the rush gives way to stillness, and the night settles fully into place. With work finished and movement slowed, your attention turns inward. Darkness has a way of doing that. When there is little to see and even less to do, the mind fills the space on its own. Night in the Middle Ages is not just a physical condition, it is a mental one. You sit still, listening. Every small sound feels amplified now that there are fewer distractions. A board creaks. Something shifts outside. Wind presses against the walls and then pulls away again. Each noise asks the same quiet question. Is this normal, or is it something else? This is where belief takes root most easily, not because people lack reason, but because reason works best with information, and information is scarce in the dark. Many medieval stories about spirits, wandering souls, and unseen forces are rooted in nighttime experience. The world feels less predictable when you cannot see it. Written sermons and moral texts from the period make it clear that night was often framed as a vulnerable time for the soul. Darkness was associated with temptation, fear, and disorder. This idea shaped behavior as much as theology. People were encouraged to remain indoors, to pray, to keep their thoughts guarded as carefully as their doors. You feel that caution settle over the room. Conversation, when it happens, stays close to familiar ground. There is less laughter now, less playful argument. Night is not the time for challenging ideas. It is the time for reassurance. There is a curious detail that appears in several folk traditions. Certain tasks were believed to attract misfortune if done after dark. Whistling indoors, spinning thread, cutting nails. These beliefs varied by region, but they share a common theme. Night is seen as a time when boundaries are thinner, when actions carry unintended consequences. Modern historians have not reached a single conclusion about how literally these beliefs were taken. Some argue they functioned as practical rules disguised as superstition. Avoid spinning at night because poor light leads to mistakes. Avoid sharp tools because injury is harder to treat. Others suggest genuine fear played a role. Sitting here now, the distinction feels less important. The effect is the same. Night limits behavior. You become aware of how imagination shifts in the dark. Thoughts drift more easily toward memory and worry. The face of someone lost, a debt unpaid, a sickness not yet healed. Darkness gives these thoughts room to grow. Religious practice offers structure against this drift. Quiet prayers are spoken, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently. Familiar words steady the mind. Bells heard earlier remind you that others are awake too. Praying in different houses, different rooms. This shared ritual makes the night feel less lonely. You notice how shadows stretch and reshape the room. A hanging cloak resembles a figure until you look closer. A pile of tools takes on unfamiliar angles. The mind supplies detail where vision fails. This is not fear, exactly, but heightened alertness. There is evidence from legal records that nighttime accusations often involved things seen or heard, but not clearly identified. A noise, a shape, a movement at the edge of sight. Night blurs certainty, and blurred certainty invites suspicion. You shift your position slightly, seeking comfort. The act feels deliberate, almost cautious. Even rest requires awareness. You do not stretch fully. You do not move suddenly. The body learns restraint. Outside, the night continues its quiet work. Owls call. Insects move through grass. Animals that hid during the day now claim their hours. You share this darkness with them, whether you want to or not. There is debate among scholars about whether medieval people slept more soundly or more lightly than modern ones. Some suggest exhaustion led to deep rest. Others argue that constant alertness prevented full relaxation. Your own experience suggests something in between. Sleep comes, but it is easily disturbed. As thoughts slow, you become aware of your own breathing. It sounds louder in the stillness. You listen to it the way you might listen to the fire earlier, as something essential that must be maintained. You think about the morning, about light returning, about the bell that will announce it. This anticipation brings comfort. Night feels less oppressive when it is framed as temporary. Gradually, imagination loosens its grip. Thoughts lose their sharp edges. Sounds blend together. The room fades again into simple sensation. Warmth, pressure, weight. The darkness remains, but it no longer presses so hard. You have adjusted. Night has done what it always does. It has narrowed the world until rest becomes the most reasonable response. And so you let go, trusting the walls, the routines, and the coming dawn to hold you until light returns. Sleep does not arrive all at once. It never really does here. Instead, it drifts in gradually, like fog creeping across a field. You lie still, eyes closed, but awareness lingers. The room has not disappeared just because your eyes are shut. You can still sense the shapes of people nearby, the faint warmth where bodies rest close together, the slow settling of the house around you. This way of sleeping feels different from what you know. It is lighter, more fragmented. You drift off, then surface again without alarm. This pattern repeats, and it does not feel unusual. For medieval people, this rhythm is familiar. Night is not a single, uninterrupted block of rest. Written sources from the period suggest that sleep often came in two main phases. People would rest deeply for several hours, wake for a time, then sleep again until morning. This pattern appears across regions and social classes, suggesting it was not an exception but a norm shaped by darkness itself. You find yourself waking naturally after some time, not startled, not anxious, simply awake. The fire is long gone now. The room is dark, but your eyes adjust more quickly than before. You can make out vague outlines. The sense of night has changed. It feels quieter, deeper. Others are awake too. You hear a shift of straw, a quiet cough. Someone murmurs softly. Perhaps a prayer. Perhaps just words spoken to fill the space. This waking interval is not considered insomnia. It is expected. There is evidence from devotional texts that this middle stretch of the night was often used for reflection or prayer. With fewer distractions and no pressure to work, the mind turns inward. Night encourages contemplation whether you ask for it or not. You notice how calm this moment feels. The earlier edge of uncertainty has dulled. Darkness feels less threatening now that you have spent hours inside it. The mind adapts. Some people rise briefly. They tend to the fire if embers remain. They step outside to relieve themselves. They check animals or secure doors again. These movements are slow and careful, guided by memory more than sight. There is disagreement among modern scholars about how widespread these midnight activities truly were. Some argue they were limited to certain households or regions. Others believe they were common enough to shape language and habit. Sitting here now, it feels natural rather than unusual. You listen to the night beyond the walls. It sounds different than it did earlier. Fewer sudden noises, more steady ones. Wind, distant animals. The world outside seems to have settled into its own rhythm. This pause between sleeps offers a strange clarity. Thoughts feel less cluttered. Problems that seemed heavy earlier now feel distant. You consider the day ahead, but without urgency. Morning will come when it comes. You notice how your body feels. Muscles loosened by rest, breathing slow and steady. Cold still present, but manageable. You pull your cloak tighter without fully waking. A rarely discussed detail appears in some household accounts. Couples often use this waking time to talk quietly or to share intimacy. Night offered privacy of a different kind. Not solitude, but separation from the demands of daylight. Eventually, drowsiness returns. Not suddenly, but gently. Eyelids grow heavy again. The mind releases its hold. You settle back into sleep. Deeper this time. Dreams come more easily now. They are shaped by darkness and by the stories you have heard all your life. Forests, shadows, bells, familiar fears and comforts weave together. Night feeds imagination even as the body rests. There is uncertainty about how people interpreted these dreams. Some believed they carried meaning or warnings. Others treated them as passing images. In either case, dreams felt closer to waking life than they often do now. Without bright mornings and artificial light, the boundary between sleep and waking was softer. You stir once more before dawn, not fully awake, just aware. The room feels different again, cooler, still. Night is thinning. Somewhere far off, a bell rings. It is faint, but recognizable. This sound does not announce light yet, but it promises it. The night is loosening its grip. You rest in that knowledge. Darkness has not defeated you. It has simply shared itself with you, hour by hour, breath by breath. Soon, morning will arrive, not abruptly, not dramatically, but steadily, as it always does. And you drift, waiting for it. Cold makes itself known long before dawn. It does not rush in or announce itself loudly. It creeps. You feel it first at the edges of your body, where warmth escapes most easily. Fingers, toes, the tip of your nose. Even in sleep, the body notices these changes and responds without waking fully. The room feels different now. The air is heavier, denser, as if it has settled during the long hours of darkness. Whatever heat the fire once offered has long since been absorbed by walls and floor, leaving behind only memory. Stone and earth give nothing back willingly. You shift slightly, instinctively drawing your limbs closer to your center. This movement happens without thought. Medieval knights teach the body efficiency. Every unnecessary motion wastes heat. Curling inward becomes second nature. It is clear from surviving accounts that nighttime cold was one of the most persistent challenges of everyday life. Even in regions with milder climates, temperatures dropped sharply after sunset. Without insulation in the modern sense, people relied on layering, shared warmth, and sheer endurance. You feel the bedding beneath you. Straw, wool, rough fabric that scratches slightly but traps air. Blankets are heavy, not soft. Their weight is intentional. It presses warmth inward and limits movement. Comfort here is functional rather than indulgent. A detail that surprises many people appears repeatedly in estate inventories. Multiple people often shared a single bed, not only couples or families, but servants, apprentices, even travelers. Privacy mattered less than survival. Bodies close together created heat more reliably than any blanket. You are aware of others near you. The sound of breathing, a quiet shift, a sigh. These signals are reassuring. Warmth is shared, but so is vulnerability. No one sleeps entirely alone unless they must. There is disagreement among historians about how well medieval people adapted physiologically to cold. Some suggest that constant exposure hardened the body over time. Others argue that chronic cold stress took a heavy toll on health. Lying here now, you feel both possibilities. The body adapts, but it never fully forgets discomfort. Your breath fogs faintly in the air when you exhale deeply. This is not unusual. Many accounts describe visible breath indoors during winter nights. The house shelters you from wind and snow, but it cannot defeat temperature entirely. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking it beneath your chin. Clothing is not removed for sleep unless absolutely necessary. Every layer counts. Shoes may stay on. Hats are pulled low. The idea of undressing before bed would feel wasteful here. Cold sharpens certain sensations while dulling others. You feel pressure and weight clearly. Texture matters more than temperature. Rough wool, smooth wood, the faint prick of straw through fabric. These sensations ground you in the present. Outside, the night continues to cool. Frost may be forming. Dew settles and freezes quietly. By morning, the ground will be stiff and unyielding. The body senses this change even without seeing it. There is a curious note in some monastic writings about cold being spiritually useful. Discomfort kept the mind alert, prevented indulgence, encouraged humility. Whether or not this belief was widespread, it reflects a broader acceptance. Cold was not an enemy to be conquered, only a condition to be managed. You find a position that balances warmth and circulation. Too tight and limbs ache, too loose and heat escapes. This balance is learned slowly, night after night. Sleep comes and goes lightly now. Cold interrupts deeper rest, pulling you briefly toward awareness before releasing you again. This pattern feels familiar. It does not cause panic. It simply is. Some people wake fully and add another layer. Others press closer to those beside them. These adjustments happen quietly, with minimal disruption. Everyone understands the need. There is no single agreement among scholars about how much sleep medieval people actually lost to cold. Some nights were harsher than others. Seasons mattered. Weather mattered. Resources mattered. You suspect that sleep was less about duration and more about persistence. Rest came in fragments. But it came. You listened to the sounds of the house responding to temperature. Wood contracts with a sharp creak. Thatched roofs rustle faintly. These noises are familiar enough not to alarm you. They are part of the house settling into night. Your thoughts slow again. Cold narrows focus. It discourages wandering imagination. The mind turns practical. Then quiet. Staying warm becomes the only goal worth considering. Eventually, the body finds a rhythm that works. Breathing steadies. Muscles relax as much as they can. The cold remains, but it no longer dominates attention. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster stirs prematurely. Confused by the long dark, it quiets again. Dawn is not yet ready. You remain where you are, wrapped in layers, surrounded by others doing the same. The night has tested you with cold, but you have adjusted, as people here always do. Morning will bring movement and warmth of a different kind. For now, endurance is enough, and so you rest, waiting for light, letting the cold pass through without resistance. Warmth, when it exists at all, is shared. You understand this fully now as bodies settle closer together in the dark. Space becomes a resource like light or fuel. No one wastes it. Beds are not wide. Private platforms meant for a single sleeper. They are narrow constructions built to hold warmth in, not to spread bodies out. You lie close to others, close enough to feel movement through the bedding, a shift of weight, a change in breathing. At first, this closeness feels unfamiliar. Modern instincts expect distance. Here, distance is a liability. Empty space allows cold to pool and settle. Bodies pressed together create a pocket of warmth that blankets alone cannot manage. Household records and personal letters make it clear that shared sleeping arrangements were common across medieval society. Families slept together. Servants shared beds. Travelers were offered space beside strangers. This was not seen as improper. It was practical. Night demanded cooperation. You notice how sleep positions adjust automatically. Backs turn inward. Knees tuck. Shoulders align. People arrange themselves like pieces of a puzzle, fitting together in ways that minimize exposed skin. This choreography is unspoken but well practiced. Privacy, as you understand it, does not exist here in the same way. Curtains or screens might separate beds in wealthier homes. But even then, warmth takes priority. In humbler dwellings, there is no barrier at all. Night erases social boundaries as effectively as it erases light. A detail that surprises many modern readers appears repeatedly in legal and moral texts. Shared beds were not automatically associated with intimacy. Sleeping beside someone did not imply anything beyond necessity. The culture understood the difference between closeness for survival and closeness by choice. You feel the steady rise and fall of another person's breath. It becomes a rhythm you unconsciously match. Breathing sinks. Bodies settle. Heat builds slowly, then holds. The cold retreats just enough to be tolerable. There is discussion among historians about whether this constant closeness strengthened social bonds or simply reflected hardship. Some suggest that shared sleeping fostered trust and familiarity. Others argue that it left little room for solitude or emotional distance. Lying here now, you feel both effects at once. The presence of others is comforting, but it also leaves you exposed. Smell is unavoidable. Wool, smoke, human warmth. These scents mix and linger. They are not judged. They simply exist. Night removes the option of avoiding them. Children sleep easily in this arrangement. They are used to it from birth. They curl into adults naturally, seeking warmth without hesitation. Adults accommodate them without complaint. Everyone benefits from the extra heat. You become aware of how still everyone tries to remain. Movement disrupts the fragile balance of warmth. A sudden shift lets cold air rush in. People learn to adjust slowly, signaling movement with subtle pressure rather than abrupt motion. Beds themselves are simpler than you might expect. Wooden frames, ropes or boards supporting a mattress stuffed with straw, feathers, or rags. These materials compress over time, forming hollows shaped by repeated use. Each bed remembers its sleepers. In colder months, additional layers are added: cloaks, extra blankets, even spare clothing laid over the top. Everything serves double duty. Nothing is decorative. There is uncertainty among scholars about how restful such crowded sleeping truly was. Some argue that shared beds increase disturbance. Others suggest that mutual warmth improves sleep quality despite interruptions. Your experience suggests that rest comes, but in waves. Light sleep, deeper sleep, waking. Settling again, you feel a hand shift nearby. Careful not to wake you. Someone pulls a blanket higher. Another adjusts position. These movements are quiet, considerate. Night teaches restraint. The house itself seems to respond to this closeness. Sounds soften. Even the creaking of wood feels muted. The room holds its breath along with you. At times, thoughts drift to the vulnerability of this arrangement. If danger came, if fire broke out or strangers forced entry, escape would be slow. Yet fear does not dominate. Familiarity dulls anxiety. This is how things have always been. There is evidence from court records that nighttime disputes sometimes arose from shared sleeping spaces. A misplaced elbow, a stolen blanket, a perceived slight. Close quarters magnify small tensions, but they also resolve them quickly. There is no space to hold grudges in the dark. As hours pass, warmth builds to a steady level. The body relaxes more fully. Muscles loosen. Breathing deepens. The cold recedes into the background. Dreams arrive again. Shaped by closeness, you dream of crowds, of shared journeys, of being surrounded. These images feel less threatening than they might in isolation. Toward morning, bodies begin to shift apart slightly. The worst of the cold has passed. Heat has been conserved. The need for closeness eases. You sense the change without waking fully. Space reappears slowly. The night loosens its grip. Shared warmth has carried you through another stretch of darkness. Not alone. Not entirely comfortable. But alive. Rested enough. And ready for what comes next. By now, your senses have adjusted to the night so completely that you almost forget how different it felt when darkness first arrived. What stands out most is not what you see, but what you smell. Night sharpens scent in ways daylight never does. Without wind, without movement. Every odor lingers and layers itself quietly over the last. The house smells lived in. Smoke clings to the air. Not freshly, but as a residue from hours spent near the hearth. It settles into hair and fabric and skin. Even breathing feels slightly textured, as if the air itself carries memory. There is the scent of dampness rising from the floor, especially if the house sits close to earth. Packed dirt or stone releases moisture slowly through the night. It does not drip. It simply exists, cool and persistent. This smell blends with straw and wool, with old wood and stored food. Animals contribute their presence even when they are not in the room. Livestock housed nearby leave traces that drift inward. Chickens, goats, cows. Their warmth and waste shape the nighttime atmosphere of entire settlements. Medieval life never fully separates human space from animal space. Especially after dark. You notice how quickly you stop reacting to these smells. They become background rather than intrusion. The nose learns what to ignore, just as the eyes learn to see in low light. Comfort here is not about cleanliness. It is about familiarity. Sound behaves similarly. Earlier, every noise felt significant. Now, the house has taught you which sounds matter and which do not. A mouse moving beneath the floorboards barely registers. The soft rasp of someone breathing nearby feels reassuring rather than distracting. You hear the occasional cough, dry and hollow, carried easily through the still air. Respiratory illness was common, and night often made symptoms worse. Cold air and smoke irritate lungs that have already endured years of labor and exposure. This discomfort is so widespread that it is rarely remarked upon in records. It was expected. You feel your own breath moving in and out. Warmer now, that bodies have shared heat for hours. Breathing feels slower, deeper. Each inhale brings familiar scents that anchor you in the present moment. There is a small detail preserved in some household writings that reveals how people tried to manage nighttime air. Bundles of herbs were sometimes hung near sleeping areas, not strong enough to mask smoke or dampness, but enough to add a recognizable note. Lavender, rosemary, thyme. These scents were believed to calm the body and discourage illness. Modern historians do not fully agree on how effective these practices were, but their intention is clear. People sought control where they could find it. Even a faint, pleasant smell offered comfort in an environment otherwise dictated by necessity. You shift slightly and hear fabric move against straw. The sound is soft, almost soothing. Textures speak at night. Wool brushes against skin. Wood presses into bone. Nothing is padded or cushioned in the modern sense. But the body adapts. There is an awareness of breath beyond your own. Others breathe differently. Some shallow, some heavy. These rhythms overlap and separate like waves. The room feels alive with quiet motion. Occasionally, a deeper sound cuts through. A log shifting in the wall. A gust of wind forcing its way through thatch. These sounds remind you that the house is not sealed. It negotiates constantly with the outside world. You notice how smell and sound replace vision almost entirely now. Your eyes remain closed. But you feel no urge to open them. There is nothing to gain. Darkness has equalized everything. Thoughts slow further. The mind stops cataloguing sensation and begins to drift. Smells blur together. Sounds fade into a steady hum. There is discussion among scholars about whether medieval people experienced nights as longer than we do now. Without clocks, without artificial light. Time stretched differently. Sitting here, wrapped in scent and sound, you feel that stretch. Night does not rush. It expands gently. You become aware of how the body relaxes when it stops expecting interruption. No alarms. No sudden light. Morning will arrive gradually, announced by sound and subtle change rather than shock. The smells around you are no longer distinct. They merge into something singular. Home. Shelter. Safety. Imperfect, but sufficient. A faint chill moves through the room again as the hours pass. Cold returns in cycles, reminding you that nothing here is permanent. Even warmth borrowed from others must be renewed. You breathe in slowly, then out. The air carries everything that happened today. Work, fire, food, people. Night holds it all together. Eventually, even this awareness softens. Sensation fades into background. The room recedes. The body rests more fully. Smell and sound have done their work. They have replaced sight, guiding you gently toward deeper sleep. And so you drift again, wrapped not in silence, but in the quiet presence of a world that never truly stops breathing. Time loses its sharp edges in the dark. You no longer experience it as minutes or hours, but as sensations that rise and fall, without clocks, without glowing faces or ticking hands. Night becomes something you feel rather than measure. Your body takes over the job of keeping track. You sense when rest has been long enough, when it has not, when cold nudges you awake, when warmth lets you sink deeper. These signals replace any need for numbers. Medieval life relies on this internal timing more than any external device. During the day, bells structured time for entire communities. At night, they still matter, but differently. A distant bell might mark a prayer hour, carried softly across fields and rooftops. It does not demand action from you. It reassures you that the world beyond these walls still exists. still moves forward even while you rest. You listen for these sounds without fully waking. The bell fades quickly, swallowed by distance and dark. Its echo lingers longer in the mind than in the air. Inside the house, there are no clear markers of passing time. The fire is gone. Candles are out. Shadows are meaningless. What remains is the slow rhythm of breathing, shared among sleepers. That rhythm becomes the clock. You notice how hunger feels different at night. It does not arrive sharply. It murmurs. Evening meals were eaten earlier, intentionally, to avoid cooking in poor light. By now, hunger is a distant sensation, dulled by sleep and cold. It can wait until morning. Thirst, however, makes itself known more clearly. Dry air, smoke, mouth breathing in sleep. These factors combine quietly. Water may be nearby, but reaching for it requires effort and awareness. Many people choose to wait rather than risk stumbling in the dark. It is recorded in several personal accounts that nighttime thirst was common and often endured until dawn. Comfort was weighed against risk, and risk usually lost. You feel the house respond to temperature changes again. Wood contracts with a soft groan. Thatch shifts overhead. These sounds are familiar enough not to alarm you. They serve as reminders that the building itself experiences night alongside you. There is an interesting observation found in some early medical texts. Physicians noted that the human body behaved differently at night, becoming more sensitive to cold and pain. Whether this was observation or assumption is still discussed. But the experience feels real enough as you lie here, aware of every pressure point and ache. Your body adjusts positions slowly, testing comfort. Too long in one posture brings stiffness. Movement is careful and economical. Each adjustment is followed by stillness, as if the body waits to see whether it has chosen well. Outside, the night deepens further. The air cools another degree. Moisture settles. In winter, frost thickens silently. In warmer seasons, dew gathers on leaves and roofs. These changes go unseen, but they affect the world you will meet in the morning. You think briefly of those who must remain awake through the night. Guards, watchmen, bakers preparing early loaves. Their experience of darkness is different. More alert, more demanding. For most people, however, night is for endurance, not productivity. There is no universal agreement among historians about how often medieval people woke simply because they were uncomfortable. Some argue sleep was frequently broken. Others believe familiarity softened discomfort over time. Your own rest suggests a balance. Sleep is interrupted, but not ruined. The body adapts. You drift in and out again, aware of time stretching and folding. Dreams blur into waking thought. Waking thought drifts back into sleep. There is no firm boundary. At some point, you notice a subtle shift in the quality of darkness. It is still dark, but not as dense. This change is not visual. It is atmospheric. The night feels less heavy, less settled. Dawn is approaching, even if it remains unseen. Birds are quiet for now, but the world feels poised. The long pause before morning has begun. Your body senses it before your mind does. You breathe more deeply, as if preparing for movement. Muscles loosen. The cold feels less intrusive. The hardest part of the night has passed. Time, which felt endless hours ago, now seems to have moved without effort. This is the quiet trick of medieval night. It teaches patience by removing alternatives. You remain still, letting this awareness settle. Morning will arrive when it is ready. You do not need to summon it. For now, you rest in this in-between space, guided by breath and sensation rather than clocks or light. Even in the deepest hours of night, work does not disappear completely. It changes shape. It grows quieter and more selective. But it never vanishes. You become aware of this as subtle movements ripple through the darkness. Careful and purposeful. Somewhere nearby, someone rises slowly, testing the floor with bare feet before committing weight. The sound is almost nothing, but in the stillness. It carries. This is not restlessness. It is duty calling softly. Certain tasks cannot wait for daylight. Fires must be checked. Bread must be prepared hours before dawn. Animals must be calmed if they stir. Night work exists because life does not pause simply because the sun has gone. Records from medieval towns make it clear that bakers often worked through the night, especially in larger settlements. Bread needed time. Dough needed rising. Ovens required long heating. Morning loaves depended on nighttime labor. While most people slept, a few kept the rhythm of the day moving forward. You imagine the baker's space now. Dim. Warm from the oven. Heavy with the smell of grain and yeast. Hands work by memory more than sight. The movements are practiced enough to be trusted in low light. Mistakes here are costly. Flour is precious. Fuel even more so. Watchmen also claim the night as their responsibility. They walk slowly through streets you cannot see, calling out the hours, listening for sounds that do not belong. Their voices reassure as much as they warn. They remind everyone that someone is awake. Someone is listening. There is evidence in town regulations that nighttime patrols were taken seriously, even in smaller communities. Theft, fire, and disorder were greater threats after dark. Not necessarily because people were more inclined toward wrongdoing, but because darkness made response slower and damage harder to control. You feel a quiet respect for those who stay awake. Night demands more concentration than day. Fatigue weighs heavier when light does not support you. Every sound must be evaluated, every shadow considered. Inside homes, smaller tasks continue as well. Someone tends embers to keep them alive until morning. Another checks that doors remain secure. These actions are brief and deliberate. No one lingers awake longer than necessary. A lesser-known detail appears in monastic routines. Monks rose in the night for prayer at set hours. Regardless of weather or season, their sleep was broken by design. Darkness was considered a fitting time for devotion, free from distraction and noise. Modern historians do not fully agree on how disruptive these practices were to health. But the intention is clear. Night was not empty time. It was shaped by obligation and belief. You sense movement again. Closer this time. A figure passes quietly, adjusting a blanket, checking a child's breathing. Care does not sleep simply because bodies do. There is a different quality to work done at night. It feels more intimate, less performative. Actions are taken for necessity alone. There is no audience, no recognition, just completion. You remain still, observing without being seen. The night teaches this skill too. To notice without interfering, to share space without demanding attention. Outside, you hear a distant sound that might be a voice, might be wind. It fades before you can decide. The watchman moves on. The street returns to quiet. There is debate among scholars about whether medieval people resented nighttime obligations or accepted them as inevitable. Some writings suggest frustration. Others reflect calm resignation. Your own feeling leans toward acceptance. This is simply how life is arranged. The person who rose earlier returns to rest. Bedding shifts. Breathing resumes its slow rhythm. The interruption is brief, absorbed easily into the night. Work has happened without spectacle. Nothing looks different now. But something is different. Readiness has been maintained. Risks have been managed. Morning has been prepared for quietly. You feel sleep return more firmly after these small disturbances. The body understands that vigilance has been handled by others. Responsibility has been shared. Darkness remains, but it no longer feels inactive. It feels held together by unseen effort. This knowledge brings a subtle comfort. You settle deeper into rest, aware that even while you sleep, life continues its careful movement through the night. Fire never stops being a concern, even when it is nearly gone. In fact, it may be more worrying then than at any other time. You lie there, aware that the greatest danger in the night does not come from the dark itself, but from what the dark can hide until it is too late. Earlier, fire was comfort. It was warmth, light, reassurance. Now it is risk lingering quietly in the background. A glowing ember can live far longer than expected. A spark can travel without sound. A poorly placed coal can smoulder unnoticed until wood begins to burn from the inside out. This awareness never fully leaves medieval life. Town records, household rules, and local laws all reflect an intense concern with nighttime fires. Entire streets could vanish before dawn if a single hearth was mismanaged. Once darkness fell, the ability to respond quickly dropped sharply. You feel that tension in the way the fire was treated earlier. Logs spread thin, embers checked carefully, ashes smoothed and contained. These actions were not habits. They were safeguards learned through loss. It is known from legal records that many medieval towns enforced curfews not only to reduce crime, but to reduce fire risk. Fewer people moving meant fewer open flames. Less distraction meant better vigilance. Night was dangerous enough without adding carelessness. You imagine the narrow streets outside, wooden buildings pressed close together, thatch roofs dry and eager to burn. A single flame could leap from house to house faster than anyone could run. Darkness would only speed the destruction by slowing response. Inside the house, the threat feels closer and more personal. Bedding lies near where the fire once burned. Clothing hangs nearby. Everything you own is flammable. You understand now why people slept lightly. Not just because of cold or noise, but because part of the mind never fully rests while fire exists. There is a detail preserved in some household instructions that reveals how constant this concern was. Families were advised to keep water within reach at night, even when fires were low. Buckets, jugs, anything that could slow a spark long enough for help to arrive. Modern historians continue to discuss how common nighttime fires truly were. Some argue that they were relatively rare given the care people took. Others point to the frequency of fire-related laws as evidence of constant threat. Lying here now, the laws feel justified. Fire demands respect every hour it exists. You listen more carefully now, attuned to subtle sounds, a crackle where there should be none, a shift of heat, the faint smell of smoke that feels different from before. The nose learns to distinguish danger from familiarity. The body remembers stories. Someone you knew who lost a home, a street rebuilt after a blaze. These memories shape behavior more powerfully than instruction. Night magnifies them. Even after embers fade completely, concern does not disappear. Residual heat remains. Ash can hide sparks. The hearth itself stays warm long after flame is gone. People learn to treat it like a living thing that only truly sleeps when morning arrives. You notice how this vigilance coexists with exhaustion. Bodies are tired. Minds want rest. The balance between caution and surrender is delicate. Too much vigilance prevents sleep. Too little invites disaster. There is disagreement among scholars about whether this constant low-level alertness affected long-term health. Some suggest it contributed to anxiety and poor rest. Others believe it became background noise, absorbed into daily life. Your own experience suggests both are true. The concern exists, but it no longer dominates. The house creaks again, and your body tenses briefly before relaxing. Not fire, just wood responding to temperature. The distinction matters. You learn it over time. Outside, night continues indifferent to human worry. Wind shifts. Air cools. Fire is a human problem. Created and controlled, but never fully mastered. In wealthier homes, additional precautions exist. Stone hearths raised from the floor. Chimneys that carry smoke upward more reliably. Servants assigned to check fires during the night. Even so, risk remains. No structure is immune. In humbler homes, caution replaces infrastructure. Attention replaces technology. People learn to read signs early. A smell, a warmth where there should be none. Night sharpens this awareness. You settle again, trusting that the fire has been tamed for now. Trust here is not blind. It is earned through repeated checking and habit. Sleep deepens gradually. The part of your mind that listened for danger retreats slightly, though it never vanishes entirely. It rests with one ear open. As hours pass without incident, confidence grows. The night has passed another test. Fire has remained contained. Shelter holds. This constant negotiation shapes medieval nights profoundly. Darkness alone is manageable. Cold can be endured. But fire demands respect at every moment. You breathe slowly, letting this awareness fade into the background where it belongs. Vigilance has done its work. For now, safety holds. And so you rest again, knowing that when morning comes, fire will return to its role as ally rather than threat, at least for another day. Light is never equal here, and you have known that since the first nightfall. Now, lying awake in the dark, you understand it more clearly. Who has light and who does not shapes everything. Not just comfort, but safety, authority, and opportunity. In poorer homes, night is accepted as it comes. Firelight fades. Candles are rare, and darkness is simply endured. In wealthier households, the experience is different. Not bright, not modern, but controlled. Extra candles, better hearths, thicker walls. These advantages do not erase night, but they soften it. You imagine a large house not far from here, stone walls instead of wood, multiple rooms instead of one, servants moving quietly through corridors, each carrying a small flame shielded carefully by hand and habit. Light still flickers, but it lasts longer. Darkness waits outside doors rather than flooding every corner at once. This difference is not subtle. It is felt in the body. More light means fewer stumbles, fewer injuries, less fear of fire spreading unnoticed. It means the ability to read, to write, to plan after sunset. These small advantages accumulate over time. Documents from the period show that candles and fuel were often listed among household assets. Light itself was a form of wealth. It could be counted, stored, distributed. Those with more of it lived differently after dark. You feel how this imbalance shapes behavior. In humbler homes, night signals retreat, activity narrows, movement slows. In richer ones, evening stretches longer. Conversations continue. Work persists. Decisions are made. There is an interesting note in several urban records. Curfews often applied differently depending on status. Certain people were permitted to move after dark because they could afford lanterns or torches. Light granted permission. Darkness enforced limits. This division extends beyond homes. Streets near wealthy quarters are better maintained. Watchmen pass through more often. Fires are controlled more strictly. Poorer areas exist closer to risk, closer to shadow. You sense how this knowledge sits uneasily with those who lack light. Night reminds them daily of their place in the world. Darkness is not just natural, it is social. At the same time, there is a strange equality in sleep. Once candles are extinguished and fires dim, everyone lies in the same darkness. Wealth cannot prevent cold entirely. It cannot silence every sound. Night humbles even those who control it best. Some historians argue that this shared vulnerability softened social divisions at night. Others believe inequality was only made more obvious by contrast. Lying here now, you feel both. The rich may delay darkness, but they cannot escape it. You think about churches, where light behaves differently. Candles burn through the night before altars. Sanctuaries glow faintly even when homes go dark. This constant light carries meaning. It signals protection, presence, and order. It reassures believers that something watches over the night. Access to these spaces matters. Not everyone lives close enough to benefit from their glow. For some, the church bell is the only reminder that such light exists at all. You feel the weight of night again. Steady and impartial. Darkness does not care who you are. It responds only to flame. Sleep shifts around you. Someone sighs. Another turns. Bodies adjust as warmth changes. These small movements ignore status entirely. In sleep, everyone negotiates with the same cold. There is discussion among historians about whether night offered moments of quiet resistance to social hierarchy, when no one can see clearly, when voices are hushed, when roles blur slightly. Perhaps people felt freer in thought if not in action. This idea is difficult to prove, but it lingers. You consider how silence equalizes. Without sight, authority loses some of its sharpness. Commands soften. Presence matters less. Darkness flattens. At the same time, fear can reinforce hierarchy. Those with resources feel safer. Those without feel exposed. Night magnifies both comfort and anxiety, depending on what you possess. You sense the house holding together around you, doing its imperfect job. Walls separate you from the street. Roofs hold back wind. These protections are unevenly distributed across society, but they exist everywhere in some form. Eventually, the thought fades. Night does not encourage long analysis. It encourages rest. The body draws attention back to itself. Breathing, warmth, stillness, light, or the lack of it, has shaped this entire experience. It has dictated movement, work, fear, and rest. It has revealed difference and shared vulnerability in equal measure. As you drift again towards sleep, you accept this imbalance without fully understanding it. Morning will restore clearer lines. For now, night blurs them just enough to allow rest. Darkness settles evenly at last, touching every home, rich or poor, with the same quiet hand. Night inside a castle feels different from night anywhere else. You sense it immediately, even before you understand why. The walls are thicker. The spaces are larger. The silence carries more weight. Darkness does not press in the same way it does in a small house, but it lingers longer, pooling in corners and corridors that stretch beyond the reach of any single flame. You move slowly through stone passageways where sound behaves strangely. Footsteps echo, then vanish. A cough travels farther than expected. Even breathing seems louder here. Castles were built to intimidate and defend. And at night, that purpose becomes more apparent. They feel less like homes and more like watchful bodies holding their breath. Torches are placed carefully. Not everywhere, but at intervals that assume familiarity with the space. These points of light do not guide strangers. They guide those who already know the way. You understand quickly that castles are meant to confuse outsiders, especially after dark. It is clear from architectural records that castles were never intended to be brightly lit at night. Light created vulnerability. It revealed movement. It offered targets. Darkness, when controlled, was an advantage. The night belonged to those who knew where they were going. You pass by heavy doors reinforced with iron bands. They are closed now, barred for the night. Each one separates access, dividing the castle into zones of increasing privacy and security. Not everyone sleeps in the same part of the structure. Status determines proximity to danger and protection alike. Guards remain awake. You feel their presence even when you do not see them. They stand near gates, towers, and walls, listening more than watching. Their job is patience. Hours of stillness punctuated by moments of sharp attention. Night demands endurance from them in ways day never does. There is evidence in military manuals that nighttime vigilance was considered more difficult and more honorable than daytime duty. Fatigue, cold, and uncertainty tested discipline. A guard who failed at night endangered everyone within the walls. You imagine the view from the battlements now. Darkness spreads outward, swallowing roads and fields. Fires from distant villages flicker faintly, then disappear. The castle sits elevated, isolated, aware of its dominance and its vulnerability at once. Inside, the rhythms of night continue. Servants move quietly, carrying covered lamps. Their steps are practiced. They know which stones creak and which do not. In a place where sound travels easily, silence becomes skill. Sleeping arrangements reflect hierarchy clearly. Lords and ladies rest in chambers protected by multiple layers of doors and guards. Their rooms may hold candles longer, fires tended through the night. Even so, the stone around them remains cold, indifferent to status. You notice how drafty these spaces can be. Castles prioritize defense over comfort. Narrow windows admit little light and plenty of cold. At night, wind finds its way through arrow slits and imperfect joints in stone. Blankets are heavy. Clothing is layered. Even wealth cannot fully tame the chill. There is disagreement among historians about how comfortable castle life truly was at night. Some descriptions emphasize luxury and security. Others point to constant discomfort and isolation. Walking these corridors in the dark, you feel the truth lies somewhere between. Castles protect, but they do not soothe. Sound carries stories here. A distant clang, a murmur behind a door, a guard calling softly to another. Each noise feels intentional. Even when it is not, the mind fills gaps quickly in such spaces. You think of the people who slept uneasily within these walls. Power did not grant peace. In fact, it often invited anxiety. Threats were real. Enemies existed. Night amplified every possibility. Candles are extinguished carefully. No one wants to advertise wakefulness unnecessarily. Fires are reduced to embers. The castle dims, but never fully sleeps. Awareness remains layered and distributed, held by many rather than one. There is a curious note in some chronicles describing how lords paced their chambers at night. Unable to rest. Worry travelled with power. Decisions made in daylight echoed loudly after dark. Night stripped away distractions and left only consequence. You feel how the castle holds memory. Stone remembers footsteps. Walls have heard secrets. Darkness brings these impressions closer to the surface. It feels as though the structure itself is listening. Eventually, movement slows further. Even guards shift less frequently. The deepest hours of night approach. Cold settles into stone. Silence thickens. Yet beneath that stillness, readiness remains. Weapons are within reach. Doors are secured. Eyes remain alert. The castle does not relax fully. It cannot afford to. As you lie down in this vast, echoing place, you realize that castles experience night as both shield and test. Darkness protects them, but it also demands constant attention. Sleep comes here too, but it is lighter, threaded with awareness. Even rest feels strategic. And so the castle waits through the night. Stone and shadow holding together until dawn returns and purpose sharpens again. Sound becomes the keeper of time now. In the absence of light, it is sound that tells you where you are in the night, how far it has progressed, and what still lies ahead. You listen differently than you do during the day. Ears stay open even when eyes are closed. Awareness rests lightly, ready to lift at the smallest change. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bell rings. Not loud, not urgent, but steady. It drifts across rooftops and fields, softened by distance and darkness. This is not a call to gather. It is a marker, a reminder that time still moves even when the world appears still. Church bells divide the night into known pieces. Prayer hours punctuate darkness the way sunrise and sunset shape the day. Even if you do not rise to pray, the sound reaches you. It reassures. Someone is awake. Order persists. Written religious schedules from the Middle Ages show how carefully these hours were observed in monastic life. Bells rang at fixed points, regardless of weather or season. Monks rose from sleep to chant prayers in cold stone chapels, their voices filling spaces that otherwise belonged entirely to night. You imagine that sound now, soft at first, then layered as more voices join. Latin words rise and fall, carried by breath made visible in the cold air. These prayers do not chase away darkness. They exist within it. For those outside monasteries, bells still matter. They tell farmers, townspeople, and travellers that the night is progressing normally. No emergency, no alarm, Just time unfolding as expected. You notice how your body responds to these sounds even when you are half asleep. A bell rings, and something in you registers it. Not consciously, more like recognition. The night has turned another page. Other sounds carry meaning too. A watchman's call, a distant knock, the creak of a gate. Each one is weighed quickly in the mind. Does it belong, or does it signal trouble? There is evidence from town ordinances that watchmen were required to call out the hours specifically to prevent panic. Silence bred fear. Sound created reassurance. Even a simple voice in the dark reminded people that they were not alone. Inside the house, smaller sounds fill the gaps. A sleeper murmurs. Someone turns over. A piece of straw shifts under weight. These noises blend into a low background rhythm, familiar enough to be ignored, but present enough to signal life. You realize how deeply sound shapes medieval nights. Without clocks, without light, it becomes the primary sense for orientation. Hearing replaces sight as the main way of understanding the world. There is a curious habit noted in some communities. People left doors or shutters slightly open at night, not for air, but to hear better. Complete silence could feel more dangerous than noise. Sound provided information. This practice varied by region and circumstance. In places where danger was more likely, everything was sealed tightly. In quieter areas, listening was valued as much as locking. Modern scholars have discussed whether constant exposure to nighttime sound heightened stress or sharpened awareness over time. It is difficult to say. Lying here now, you feel alert without feeling anxious. The sounds do not overwhelm. They inform. The bell rings again later, marking another hour. It feels closer to morning now. Though darkness still holds, time stretches, but it also moves steadily forward. You notice how sound changes as night deepens. Earlier, there were more interruptions, movement, occasional voices. Now, everything feels slower, more deliberate. Even animals quiet down for a while. Then, gradually, the pattern shifts again. A bird stirs prematurely. Another answers. Not full song. Just a test call. The world is beginning to wake, even if light has not yet arrived. This early sound carries a different quality. It does not reassure the way bells do. It promises change. Morning is approaching. You breathe in more deeply. Aware of this shift, the night feels thinner now. Less heavy. Sound travels differently. The air itself seems to prepare for movement. Inside the house, sleepers stir more often. Someone coughs. Another sighs. Bodies sense the coming transition before minds do. There is no sudden moment when night ends. Sound reveals its gradual retreat. Bells continue. Birds multiply their calls. Distant human activity resumes quietly. You remain still. Listening. Sound has guided you through darkness, marking time, providing reassurance, and signaling change. As the final hours of night unfold, you trust your ears more than your eyes. They have carried you safely through uncertainty. Soon, light will return and reclaim its role. But for now, sound remains your guide, gently leading you toward morning. Illness feels different at night. You become aware of this as discomfort that might have been tolerable during the day begins to feel heavier once darkness settles in. Pain sharpens. Breathing feels more labored. Every sensation seems louder when there is nothing else competing for attention. You lie still, aware of your body in a way that daylight rarely allows. A dull ache in a joint, a tightness in the chest, a feverish warmth that does not belong to comfort. Night removes distraction, leaving only sensation and thought. Medical knowledge in the Middle Ages is limited, but observation is not. People know that sickness often worsens after sunset. Cold air irritates lungs. Smoke thickens breathing. Fatigue lowers resistance. These patterns are recognized even if their causes are not fully understood. You notice how those who are ill are watched more closely at night. A hand placed on a forehead, a blanket adjusted, someone listening to breathing in the dark. Care becomes quieter but more attentive. Night demands vigilance when the body is weak. There are accounts from household records describing how families arranged sleeping positions around the sick. The ill were placed closer to warmth, closer to others who could respond quickly. Privacy mattered less than survival. Care was communal. Pain also behaves differently now. Without movement, without conversation, it occupies more mental space. A tooth throbs rhythmically. A wound pulses. The mind circles these sensations, unable to escape them easily. There is debate among historians about whether medieval people feared illness more at night or accepted it as part of life. Some writings express deep anxiety about nighttime sickness, especially sudden fevers. Others describe calm endurance. Lying here now, you feel both. Concern exists, but panic is rare. This is familiar territory. Night also brings uncertainty. If someone worsens, help may not be immediately available. Healers are asleep. Roads are dark. Decisions must be made quietly, sometimes without guidance. This reality sharpens awareness of fragility. You listen to breathing nearby, counting rhythms without meaning to. Each inhale becomes reassurance. Each pause invites tension until the next breath arrives. Night trains patience in those who care. There is a curious belief found in several regions that illness spirits were more active after dark. Whether taken literally or symbolically, this belief shaped behavior. Prayers were spoken, charms placed near beds, words of protection whispered softly. These acts offered comfort even if they did not cure. Modern scholars remain divided on how effective such practices were psychologically. What is clear is that they gave people something to do when medicine offered little else. Action, even symbolic, reduces helplessness. You feel how cold complicates illness. Shivering drains energy. Warmth becomes treatment in itself. Blankets are layered. Bodies draw closer. Fire is coaxed briefly if embers remain. Heat is applied carefully, never wasted. Sleep for the sick comes in short stretches. Discomfort interrupts rest. Yet rest remains essential. Caregivers balance watching with letting sleep happen. This balance is learned through experience, not instruction. Night stretches longer when illness is present. Hours feel heavier. Time seems reluctant to move forward. The bell that marks prayer hours feels distant, almost irrelevant. Focus narrows to the body and its struggle. There is evidence in personal letters that nighttime illness created strong memories. People remembered these hours vividly, long after recovery. Night etched itself deeper into memory than day. You sense exhaustion settling over those keeping watch. Shoulders slump, breathing slows. Even concern tires eventually. The body demands rest. Gradually, the illness stabilizes, at least for now. Breathing evens. Pain dulls slightly. Nothing is solved, but nothing worsens. This small improvement feels significant. You relax marginally, allowing sleep to return. Awareness does not vanish completely, but it softens. Night continues, but its grip loosens just enough. Illness has revealed another side of darkness. Not monstrous, not dramatic, but intimate and demanding. Night asks more of the body when it is already weak. As rest deepens again, you trust the routines that have carried people through sickness for generations. Warmth, watchfulness, time. Morning will bring clearer sight and renewed options. For now, endurance is the remedy. And so you lie quietly, breathing steadily, letting night pass without struggle, waiting for light to return and ease what darkness has magnified. Animals become more noticeable at night. You sense them rather than see them. Their movements, sounds, and smells are sharper against the quiet of darkness. Livestock shifts in nearby stalls. Chickens murmur softly in the coop. Even the rats and mice you cannot see announce themselves through tiny scuttles and scratches. Night in medieval life is shared with creatures of all sizes. Records from farms and villages show that animals required constant attention after sunset. Horses and cattle needed monitoring for safety and warmth. Birds and smaller animals had to be confined. Any lapse could mean loss, injury, or worse. Night made humans and animals depend on each other more acutely than daytime did. You notice how scent guides understanding in the dark. The earthy smell of livestock, mixed with straw and the faint damp of wood, marks boundaries. It indicates where animals are resting, feeding, or shifting. You do not need to see them to know they are present. There is a curious observation in some monastic and agricultural texts. Certain animals were believed to be more active at night intentionally, either as natural behavior or through mystical association. Owls, cats, and some rodents carried symbolic weight. In addition to the practical challenges they presented, whether taken literally or not, these beliefs influenced how people arranged sleeping and working spaces after dark. You become aware of the sounds of livestock breathing, the occasional shuffle of hooves, the soft clatter of a trough being disturbed. Each noise is interpreted quickly. Some are reassuring, others demand attention. The night teaches acute listening. Outside the immediate household, sounds of wild animals carry further in the stillness. Foxes, badgers, and deer move through fields and forest edges. Their presence is known more by sound and movement than by sight. Travelers, especially, learn to respect these cues. Night outside is never entirely empty, and it requires caution. Your body responds to these auditory cues. Muscles tense slightly at a new sound. Eyes shift under closed lids. The mind weighs possibilities. This heightened sensitivity is part instinct, part learned behavior. In medieval life, ignoring such signals could have consequences. There is disagreement among modern scholars about how much fear animals inspired at night. Some argue that danger was real, with predatory animals threatening livestock and humans alike. Others suggest the perception of threat was exaggerated, amplified by darkness and imagination. Sitting here, you understand both. Every sound matters, yet not every noise signals peril. Movement in the dark is deliberate. You notice the small adjustments people make to avoid disturbing animals. Bedding is shifted carefully. Footsteps are placed on softer spots. A hand reaches out to steady a person or pet. Even sleeping arrangements are influenced by the location of animals, with warmth and safety balanced carefully. Animals also contribute to warmth. A dog curled at the foot of the bed or a cat on a chest adds heat, reduces drafts, and brings comfort. Their presence softens the harshness of stone and straw, creating pockets of warmth that humans rely upon. There are details in medieval texts describing watching animals at night. Shepherds, stable hands, and even children were sometimes assigned tasks simply to ensure animals remained calm and accounted for. These duties teach patience, attention, and awareness of the environment beyond immediate human concerns. You sense the rhythm of life is shared. Human and animal breathing synchronize. Small shifts in one part of the house ripple outward. A hoof scraping, a tail brushing against a wall, a bird stirring. These minor events define the night as much as any human action. Outside, distant sounds of forest or fields remind you that civilization does not fully dominate darkness. Predators, scavengers, and unowned creatures claim their space. Travelers, or anyone moving after sunset, must negotiate these zones carefully, often relying on instinct and experience more than light. There is a note in some chronicles that people sometimes used animals as warning systems. A dog's bark, a rooster crowing early, or even the movement of cattle could indicate approaching strangers or shifts in weather. Night amplified the utility of these instincts. As you lie in bed, the combination of warmth, presence, and movement lulls you further into rest. Animal life becomes part of the rhythm, a constant background that is both alert and reassuring. Darkness, cold, and human attention exist alongside these creatures. Together, they shape the experience of the night. You learn quickly that ignoring animals is not an option. Awareness keeps both you and them safe. Sleep becomes easier now, threaded with the constant, quiet reassurance that the house is alive and that life continues beyond your own stillness. The night is shared fully, and you are part of this ecosystem, alert yet resting. And so, as sound and warmth guide you, the hours pass gently. Humans, animals, and the dark coexist, each influencing the other in a delicate balance that will endure until morning. Traveling after dark in the Middle Ages was an exercise in caution, patience, and sometimes courage. You imagine leaving the house, stepping onto paths and roads that vanish into darkness beyond the reach of fire or torch. Every movement carries risk, not only from uneven ground, but from unseen strangers or hidden dangers. Night transforms familiar landscapes into uncertain spaces. Medieval guides and travel manuals repeatedly emphasize preparedness. A traveler would carry a small lantern or torch if they could afford one. Maps were rare, and landmarks were remembered rather than written down. Roads twisted unpredictably, and shadows of trees or hills could mislead even experienced travelers. Night limited vision drastically, forcing reliance on memory, intuition, and sound. You sense how darkness shapes decisions. Some routes are avoided altogether after sunset. Dangerous bridges, forest paths, or poorly guarded roads become impassable. Travelers plan carefully, timing departures so that distance can be covered during daylight. Or they seek the safety of inns, monasteries, or guarded towns. There is evidence in records that certain nights were considered more dangerous than others. Storms, full moons, or the absence of guiding stars could affect both the mind and the body. Travelers knew that misjudging a step or a bend could result in injury, getting lost, or exposure to criminal activity. Darkness transforms the ordinary into the uncertain. You imagine walking along a narrow road, boots crunching against frost or loose gravel. Every sound is magnified. A snapping twig could signal a deer or a hidden person. Wind carries scents unpredictably. The mind becomes alert, scanning constantly, aware that instinct is now as important as eyesight. Some communities employed night guards or mounted patrols along important routes. Their presence offered reassurance, but coverage was uneven. Travelers often had to rely on their own skills to navigate safely. Records from urban centers describe watchmen calling the hours from gates, signaling both order and the potential for danger if those signals were ignored. Curious anecdotes survive about travelers using animals as guides or protection. Dogs accompanied lone walkers, alerting them to movement and marking boundaries. Horses were kept close and well fed to ensure mobility if escape became necessary. Even a simple rooster or barn cat could provide cues that influenced movement decisions. Historians remain divided on how common attacks on travelers truly were. Some argue that the dangers were overestimated, amplified by fear and folklore. Others point to court records and legal cases documenting theft, assault, and highway robbery as evidence that nighttime travel was genuinely hazardous. Walking these imagined roads, you understand that even if attacks were rare, the perception of danger dictated behavior effectively. Weather adds another layer of complexity. Rain, snow, and fog reduce visibility and make footing treacherous. Paths become slippery. Rivers swell, and hills become deceptive shadows. Travelers had to account for these variables constantly, adjusting pace and route to compensate for the uncertainty. A simple misstep could have serious consequences. The lack of consistent lighting means that even small distances feel extended. Your mind stretches time. Each step feels deliberate, measured. Speed is dangerous. The faster you move, the less control you have over footing, balance, and attention. Patience becomes a form of safety. Night also alters social behavior along the road. Villagers retreat indoors. Curfews enforce stillness, and strangers are viewed with suspicion. Travelers pass mostly unseen, and encounters with others are brief and cautious. Conversation is minimal. Noise is carefully controlled. Every action is measured for both stealth and survival. There are fringe reports in chronicles suggesting travelers sometimes carried charms, prayers, or protective words to guard against unseen dangers. These were less about superstition and more about psychological assurance. In an environment where sight is limited and risk is uncertain, reassurance is a resource. You notice how all these factors terrain, sound, presence of animals, patrols, weather, and human behavior interact. Night transforms movement from casual navigation into an exercise in attention and resilience. Every choice has consequence. Awareness becomes both protection and burden. Despite these challenges, people did travel at night, sometimes out of necessity. Commerce, urgent messages, or personal duty required movement when daylight was insufficient. Such journeys demanded skill and careful planning, and experience was often the most reliable guide. Mistakes could be costly, but experience built instinct. You feel the rhythm of this imagined night walk, footsteps measured, pauses to listen, adjustments for unseen obstacles. The body works with the mind to navigate, guided by memory, caution, and awareness. Light is scarce, sound is constant, darkness dominates. By the time sleep returns, it is more restful because these hours of heightened attention have passed. Your mind relaxes, muscles release tension, and the house or inn offers warmth and safety. Night is no longer an unknown. It has been traversed and negotiated successfully. And so, even the darkest hours yield to vigilance, preparation, and endurance. The night may have been long and demanding, but skill and careful attention ensure that travel remains possible, and the promise of dawn becomes tangible once again. Law and order extend into the night, shaping behavior in ways that are subtle but persistent. Curfews regulate movement, gates are locked, and watchmen patrol streets to enforce rules. These measures exist not merely to prevent crime, but to maintain structure when daylight is absent and visibility is poor. You sense the rhythm of enforcement even without seeing it. Footsteps echo on cobblestones. A distant call alerts sleepers that someone is awake, observing. Noise becomes communication. Silence also communicates. People have learned to move cautiously, aware that attention is distributed, even when unseen. Town ordinances frequently required households to lock doors and secure windows at a specified hour. Failure could result in fines or public reprimand. Enforcement varied, but the principle remained: darkness cannot be allowed to become lawless. Night is both natural and socially mediated. You notice how these rules shape individual behavior. Movement slows. Chores are completed before sunset. Social interaction diminishes. Even storytelling takes a quieter form, conducted close to the hearth where the household can monitor its own members without risking exposure. Some accounts suggest that nighttime rules extended beyond urban centres. Rural communities also observed curfews, though enforcement relied more on social expectation than formal patrols. The idea is consistent night must be acknowledged, respected, and contained. You hear subtle sounds outside the creak of a gate, a door closing carefully, distant footsteps. These are not random. They reflect a shared understanding of nighttime order. Even absence of noise has meaning. A quiet street suggests compliance. A sudden shout implies transgression or urgency. Scholars debate how strictly these rules were followed. Some argue compliance was high because enforcement was consistent and social norms strong. Others suggest that necessity sometimes overrode regulation, with late-night work or travel justified despite potential penalty. Standing in the imagined streets, you recognize both possibilities. Fear and pragmatism coexist. Nighttime law shapes not only actions but perception. Darkness magnifies consequences. A misplaced step could be interpreted as intrusion. A shadow might appear threatening. Awareness of regulations trains attention. People learn to interpret the environment carefully, assigning significance to even minor sounds or movements. You notice the subtle hierarchy embedded in nighttime rules. Those with resources can secure their homes more effectively, afford lanterns, or hire guards. Poorer individuals rely on social compliance and luck. Light, vigilance, and physical security are intertwined. Darkness emphasizes inequality even while curbing freedom for all. Noise management becomes another form of social order. Singing, shouting, or even loud footsteps can attract unwanted attention. Communities enforce quiet indirectly through expectation and habit. People internalize rules, adjusting behavior without overt command. Animals, again, contribute to nighttime regulation. Dogs bark selectively, often alerting to strangers or unusual activity. Horses and livestock moving restlessly may indicate environmental changes or intrusions. Humans and animals form a network of observation that extends beyond individual senses. Curfews, locks, and vigilance also influence psychology. People sleep differently, rest more lightly, and monitor their own actions. Awareness never fully relaxes. Sleep is structured by social necessity as much as by biology. You imagine the journey of a traveler arriving at a town after dark. The gates may be closed. Entry is permitted only at designated openings. Watchmen scrutinize every approach. Rules enforce safety but also delineate privilege. Night creates boundaries that daylight obscures. There is historical debate about whether these measures effectively reduced crime or simply managed perception. Some records indicate fewer incidents occurred after curfew, while others show that misdeeds were underreported, the combination of law and fear. However, clearly influenced behavior. Inside homes, the same principles apply. Nighttime limits movement, reduces noise, and structures routine. Even children learn early that activity after sunset carries implicit risk. Night teaches discipline by framing consequence invisibly. By the mid-hours of darkness, the effectiveness of these social systems becomes apparent. Streets are empty, fires are low, doors are secure, animals rest, sleep resumes. Order persists through restraint and habit rather than constant enforcement. As you settle again, you realize that law, social expectation, and nighttime vigilance combine to create a distinct environment. Darkness is not chaotic. It is governed by rules, enforced by habit and attention. Life continues within its constraints. Even so, the underlying tension never fully disappears. Awareness remains, lightly threaded through sleep and consciousness. Night is calm yet potent. The social order persists in the shadows, shaping every step, every breath, every thought. You breathe slowly, sensing how structure, expectation, and quiet observation allow the night to pass without disaster. Human effort, regulation, and attention combine to hold darkness at bay. Sleep returns, weighted lightly by understanding and habit. And so, the night continues, shaped as much by law and social practice as by darkness itself, carrying you steadily toward the coming dawn. Storms arrive without warning, and night transforms them into more than a mere inconvenience. You lie awake, listening to wind clawing at thatch, rain pounding weakly against shutters, and the occasional thunder rolling faintly across the landscape. Each sound is amplified by darkness, its source ambiguous, its presence commanding attention. Medieval people learned quickly that storms at night required vigilance, unlike daytime weather. Without light, visibility is reduced to near nothing. Even familiar paths become treacherous. Roofs leak, fires risk being extinguished. Rivers swell unseen. Preparation and awareness are essential, and the consequences of misjudgment can be severe. You sense the mood of the house shifting. Sleep becomes lighter. Movements are careful and deliberate. Someone checks that doors are secure. Another adjusts coverings over the fire to prevent embers from escaping. Every action is measured to balance protection and survival. Documents from rural regions show that storms could disrupt entire villages after sunset. Livestock needed shelter. Stored grain required attention to prevent water damage. Weak structures risked collapse. Even smaller disturbances, a roof tile dislodged or a branch fallen, could create hazards that only darkness magnifies. There are accounts describing how people used the sound of storms to gauge their environment. Rain hitting thatch versus stone produces different tones, signaling whether water is accumulating dangerously. Wind direction guides whether shutters or barriers need adjustment. The body becomes attuned to auditory cues that daylight would normally obscure. You notice how shadows deepen under storm-driven darkness. Flickers from fires become more noticeable. Their glow both reassuring and urgent. Fire management takes on a protective role, balancing warmth against risk. The smallest ember must be monitored, as a gust could spread it unpredictably. Weather has an indirect effect on social behavior as well. Villagers remain indoors. Streets empty quickly when storm clouds obscure moonlight. Noise diminishes to a cautious murmur. Movement slows everywhere, except for those who must act guards, watchmen, or those attending to animals and supplies. There is debate among scholars about the psychological impact of nocturnal storms. Some argue that repeated exposure built resilience. Others suggest chronic stress from such nights contributed to sleep disruption and heightened anxiety. Experiencing it now, you feel both the mind sharpens, but rest becomes fragmented. Animals respond differently in storms. Horses shift uneasily. Cattle bray or shuffle. Dogs grow restless. Their reactions alert humans to changes too subtle for ears or eyes alone. This interplay reinforces awareness, tying all inhabitants of a dwelling to the storm's rhythm. Interestingly, folklore often incorporates storm behavior into warnings or moral lessons. Some accounts describe spirits or omens appearing specifically during nocturnal storms. Whether interpreted literally or metaphorically, these stories underscore the heightened attention and vigilance required. You adjust position instinctively, seeking warmth, minimizing exposure to drafts, and avoiding sudden movements. Every action is slow, deliberate, and calculated. Sleep becomes an intermittent visitor rather than a constant companion. The mind evaluates, reacts, and waits for a lull in sound. Outside, the night appears vast and indifferent. The storm obscures terrain entirely. Paths you might know by day vanish. Trees sway unpredictably. Rivers murmur or roar in places where dry earth is normally solid. This uncertainty reinforces the necessity of caution. Darkness and storm conspire to hide hazards. Inside, the household maintains its small order. Candles are lit only if absolutely necessary. Embers are stirred sparingly. Walls and doors are monitored for leaks or intrusion. Each measure is repeated with quiet precision. Routine, vigilance, and small adjustments govern survival. There are also records indicating that storms influenced nighttime prayer and reflection. People sought reassurance in ritual when external controls seemed limited. Words and actions offered psychological stability, even if they did not alter physical risk. Devotion interweaves with survival, blending spiritual and practical responses. You notice that sleep, when it comes, is lighter but still restorative. The body reacts to subtle cues in the environment, maintaining vigilance even while resting. Dreams are shaped by sound, by shifting warmth, by the intermittent crack of branches or water against walls. Consciousness and environment remain intertwined. Eventually, the storm loses some of its urgency. Rain softens, wind slows, thunder fades, darkness remains, but the immediate threat diminishes. Relief is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet profound. Night returns to its regular rhythm, guided by habit, awareness, and endurance. By this point, you sense the skill embedded in these practices. Night, storm, and darkness do not paralyze. They teach observation, caution, and adaptation. Every individual in the household contributes to the management of risk. consciously or not. Vigilance is a communal act. You breathe slowly, letting body and mind relax slightly. The storm has passed through, leaving darkness intact but more manageable. You realize that survival is a layered practice. It combines instinct, learned behavior, routine, and attention to subtle cues in ways that daylight rarely demands. Sleep deepens once more. Breathing evens. Muscles release tension. Awareness does not vanish entirely, but it softens. Night is no longer an adversary, but a condition mastered through attention and experience. And so, even storms surrender to human persistence, allowing darkness to pass with fewer disruptions, and preparing the household for the eventual approach of morning. Winter nights bring a different challenge. You feel it immediately, as darkness settles more completely, and for longer hours. The days shrink, the sun retreats, and the night expands to dominate almost half of every 24-hour cycle. Cold intensifies. Air becomes sharper, and time itself seems to stretch indefinitely. You notice how houses respond. Thick walls absorb whatever heat is available, then release it slowly and reluctantly. Hearths are tended more carefully. Embers stirred frequently to extract maximum warmth. Blankets are layered strategically. Shared sleeping becomes almost mandatory, as individual bodies alone cannot generate enough heat to remain comfortable through the long hours. Historical accounts make it clear that winter required foresight. Firewood had to be gathered in advance, food stored for quick preparation, water sources protected from freezing. Night brought no mercy, and preparation was essential. The cold was not simply an inconvenience, it dictated daily routines and structured activity more than any calendar could. You sense how sleep itself changes. Long nights are often broken into multiple phases, separated by waking periods when temperature, thirst, or the need to tend animals calls attention. These interruptions are expected and accepted. A single stretch of uninterrupted sleep is rare. Even brief waking is used efficiently. Checking embers, adjusting bedding, or quietly moving to avoid chilling. There is a curious observation found in several village records. People sometimes layered clothing even in bed, leaving outer garments on to preserve warmth. Shoes might stay close, hats near pillows, all to minimize heat loss. The weight and bulk of clothing compresses the body in ways that make sleep less expansive but more effective in preserving life. Outside, the night is oppressive in its cold. Frost thickens unnoticed. Snow may accumulate quietly, and rivers or streams freeze near the edges. The dark shapes of familiar trees, hills, and houses become deceptive. Movement is riskier than usual, requiring knowledge, instinct, and caution. Those who venture outdoors must navigate uncertain terrain while balancing heat retention against exertion. Animals, once again, play an essential role. Livestock must be sheltered, fed, and monitored. Even small creatures like chickens need protection from frost. Their warmth contributes to shared comfort inside structures, but only if they are attended to properly. Cold amplifies the interdependence of humans and animals during winter nights. Scholars have debated whether medieval people perceived these long nights as threatening or simply demanding. Some sources suggest a heightened awareness of mortality during winter darkness. Others describe acceptance, resignation, and learned adaptation. As you imagine lying awake, adjusting layers, and listening to the house settle around you, both interpretations feel accurate. Fear exists but is balanced by skill and routine. Fires themselves require particular attention. Winter air is denser, colder, and less forgiving. Hearths must be managed to sustain warmth throughout extended periods. Embers are coaxed carefully. Fuel is rationed to maintain heat while avoiding waste. Smoke can accumulate more readily in poorly ventilated spaces, irritating eyes and lungs, but cannot be entirely avoided. You notice how social interaction shifts in long nights. Conversation is minimal to preserve heat. Stories are short, practical, or comforting rather than expansive or playful. Movement is measured. Even laughter is restrained. The night structures behavior as efficiently as light structures labor during the day. There is also evidence that winter darkness influenced diet. Heavier, more energy-dense foods are prepared to compensate for the cold and extended restlessness. Porridge, stews, and preserved meats dominate. Cooking at night is limited to urgent needs to conserve both light and fuel. Even nutrition becomes tied to the demands of darkness. You feel the interplay of cold and human ingenuity. Every layer of clothing, every shared bed, every controlled ember represents adaptation. Night is not simply endured, it is negotiated. Sleep comes again, deeper this time, though periodically interrupted by discomfort or instinctive vigilance. Bodies huddle together. Breath is shared in warm pockets. The household functions as a network, each individual and animal contributing to the survival of all. Outside, the winter landscape is silent yet potent. Snow dampens sound, making distant noises sharper. Ice creaks quietly in the cold. Wind may howl over roofs. These sounds guide movement, alert attention, and mark time. You sense how medieval people would have interpreted these cues instinctively, navigating their environment with practiced attention. You notice your own body adjusting repeatedly. Arms fold differently. Legs bend for insulation. Every small shift preserves warmth, reduces exposure, and supports rest. Even discomfort is managed consciously and effectively. This labor of the body is subtle but constant. There is uncertainty among modern historians about how people psychologically coped with long winter nights. Some accounts describe stress, fatigue, and heightened anxiety. Others emphasize community, routine, and ritual as stabilizing factors. You experience both realities, awareness of discomfort and the comfort of structured, shared endurance. Eventually, hours pass, embers fade. Breath becomes the dominant sound. Movement slows to near stillness. The night, though long, has been survived through preparation, cooperation, and careful attention to every detail of body, fire, and environment. And as you drift towards sleep again, the vast darkness feels less oppressive. Its challenges are understood, anticipated, and navigated. Cold and time are formidable, but human skill and adaptation persist through the night. Dreams begin to take shape as night deepens further. Without artificial light to fragment perception, imagination stretches more freely. Your mind conjures landscapes, memories, and possibilities, blending them into a tapestry that feels both vivid and insubstantial. Night shapes these images, emphasizing shadows, movement, and texture in ways that daylight never does. You notice how the unconscious mind fills in gaps left by limited sensory input. Shapes emerge in darkness. Sounds take on meaning that might not exist. Stories your mind has stored over the years resurface, sometimes altered, sometimes amplified. The night fosters creativity while simultaneously testing patience and resilience. Historical accounts indicate that people often interpreted dreams as messages or omens. They paid attention to recurring motifs, the behavior of animals, or actions that seemed out of place. While some interpretations were literal, many were metaphorical, serving as guidance for decisions, reflection on morality, or personal introspection. Night was a time when the boundary between waking and dreaming blurred, giving thought a freer stage. You become aware of the continuity between sleep and wakefulness. Moments of alertness punctuate rest, especially during longer nights or in winter. Movement, slight shifts in temperature, or the faint sounds of animals can draw attention for a few heartbeats before you drift again. This cyclical pattern trains the body and mind in observation, endurance, and adaptation. Animals influence the dreamscape indirectly. The soft breathing of livestock, the occasional stir of a companion's movement, or the distant calls of nocturnal creatures seep into the mind. shaping imagery and narrative in subtle ways. Dreams may feature barns, fields, or familiar paths, transformed into symbolic landscapes. Humans and animals share a nocturnal rhythm, their presence intertwined in both waking and dreaming. You realize how stories and lore influence nighttime thought. Tales of spirits, wandering souls, and protective charms learned as a child become active in dreams. They emerge in sequences that seem coherent but are fluid, blending memory, imagination, and instinct. Even when sleep is restless, these stories provide a framework that makes darkness more navigable. There is a curious note in medieval household diaries. Some individuals purposefully engage in reflection or quiet meditation during waking intervals at night. Prayer, moral consideration, or planning for the next day occupies the mind while the body rests. Night allows introspection in a concentrated way unavailable in the distractions of daylight. Scholars debate the extent to which dreams reflected waking life versus serving purely symbolic purposes. Some suggest that dreams reinforced learned behaviors, like caution, attentiveness, or social compliance. Others argue that they allowed for exploration of fears and desires that were difficult to confront during the day. Experiencing these nights, you sense both functions at work. You become aware of subtle environmental cues influencing thought. Cold shifts slightly. Fire embers glow briefly. A breeze enters through a crack. Each stimulus adjusts perception, shapes imagery, or modulates emotion. The mind integrates sensory input seamlessly, creating a continuous, immersive experience. Sleep itself is layered. Lighter phases allow consciousness to respond to subtle shifts in temperature or sound. Deeper phases permit restorative processes, consolidating memory, healing tissue, and renewing energy. The long, dark nights of winter or deep summer evenings challenge this balance, but also strengthen adaptive patterns. Outside, wind, rain, or distant animals create a low-level rhythm that underscores the dream state. Sounds ebb and flow, providing cues for orientation without fully waking the sleeper. These environmental markers, combined with internal awareness, form a landscape in which night is both experienced and negotiated. You notice how these periods of dream and wakefulness reinforce community bonds. Shared houses, common walls, and proximity of sleepers create a network of interdependence. People sense each other's presence, respond to noises and warmth, and adjust behavior without explicit communication. Nighttime becomes a collective experience, integrating awareness, adaptation, and rest. Historical sources suggest that this collective experience of night-shaped cultural practices, nighttime prayers, rituals, and observances were structured to accommodate segmented sleep, periods of vigilance, and communal living. Even seemingly minor customs, like placing objects near the hearth or arranging bedding strategically, reflect the integration of practical, social, and symbolic considerations. As the hours advance, the intensity of dreams diminishes. The mind gradually releases its hold, allowing deeper rest. The environment continues to shape experience subtly, but human adaptation has mitigated risk. Temperature is tolerable, animals are calm, and fire, if present, is stable. Darkness remains, but it is now a predictable condition rather than a threat. You feel how night has guided perception, attention, and cognition, even when unconscious. The body and mind have negotiated with temperature, light, sound, and social presence. Survival, comfort, and adaptation have coalesced into a rhythm that defines the medieval experience of darkness. And so, as pre-dawn approaches, the transition from dream to waking is gentle. Night has imparted lessons, tested endurance, and fostered awareness. The first hints of light will soon arrive, and with them, the world of day, structured differently, will resume its pace. The approach of morning becomes a subtle rhythm rather than a sudden event. You feel it first in the lightening of the air, in the faint warmth returning through frost-hardened walls, and in the quiet signals of the world outside. Birds stir softly. Animals shift in their stalls. Wind loses its sharpness. Time stretches and bends, folding the long hours of darkness into the anticipation of a new day. Inside the household senses this shift almost instinctively. Breath slows for the last time before waking. Embers in the hearth glow faintly and steadily, no longer requiring careful tending. Those who remained awake in segments of the night allow themselves to settle fully, knowing that danger has passed, the chill has lessened, and light is imminent. Records indicate that people often awaken before sunrise to prepare for the day, taking advantage of the first weak light to check fires, water sources, and livestock. Yet, even when sleep is disturbed by the body's natural rhythms, rest is restorative enough to allow alertness for the tasks ahead. Waking is neither abrupt nor panicked. It is gradual, measured, and attuned to environmental cues. The final hours of darkness have shaped your perception. Each sound, smell, and touch has been absorbed into awareness. You notice the creaking of wood, the faint movement of straw, and the soft exhalations of those around you. These signals, once amplified by fear and uncertainty, now serve as gentle markers guiding the transition into day. You are aware of the cold fading slowly, replaced by the warmth that accumulates even in drafty medieval structures. Walls, floors, and roofs release retained heat from fires maintained through the night. Straw and wool bedding radiate slowly absorbed warmth. Bodies, previously huddled tightly together for survival, begin to relax, stretching and adjusting with minimal disruption. There is a curious detail noted in personal accounts and estate records. People often begin their day by redistributing bedding and clothing, moving items that served as insulation during the night to prepare for morning tasks. Firewood is replenished if necessary. Tools are checked and readied. This transition is as much about logistics as it is about comfort. Night's preparation extends seamlessly into the day's routine. Sleep, during these final hours, is deeper and less interrupted. Dreams taper off. Consciousness resumes a steadier rhythm. The mind integrates fragments of thought, sensory experience, and reflection from the night. This integration allows the household to awaken with awareness. Physically rested, yet mentally attuned to tasks ahead. You sense how social patterns are reinforced through these nocturnal experiences. Close sleeping arrangements, shared warmth, and collaborative vigilance strengthen bonds. Children, adults, and animals are all part of a coordinated system of care and adaptation. Observing these relationships, even in imagination, reveals how communal structures are inseparable from survival. Modern historians debate whether the cumulative stress of long nights and cold influenced social hierarchies. Some argue that shared exposure to risk equalized relationships within the household. Others suggest that those with greater resources could mitigate discomfort, reinforcing status distinctions even in darkness. Lying here, observing the subtle balance between dependence and privilege, you perceive the nuance. Night teaches both equality and hierarchy, depending on circumstance. You hear distant church bells marking the early hour, signaling prayer or timekeeping. The sound carries differently than in full darkness. It blends with faint bird calls, rustling straw, and the first stirring of neighbors outside. Bells provide temporal orientation, bridging the end of night and the beginning of day. Their rhythm guides action and reinforces communal awareness. The last residual sounds of nocturnal life fade as preparation for the day begins. Animals settle into morning routines. Watchmen finish their rounds, signaling safety. The house itself seems to exhale. Walls and roof, releasing the accumulated tension of hours spent holding darkness at bay. Your body, once tense from cold, movement, and vigilance, now relaxes fully. The muscles loosen, breathing steadies, Temperature is managed more easily as warmth and light return incrementally. The household, collectively and individually, has negotiated darkness, weather, and risk successfully. Rest is complete enough to allow alertness, reflection, and readiness for the labor ahead. This final stage of night is also a time of reflection. The mind catalogues the experience awareness of fire, light, sound, and animal movement, observation of shifting temperature and the body's response, integration of vigilance, cooperation, and adaptation. These hours, previously stretched by uncertainty, now resolve into a coherent narrative, internalized as practical knowledge and resilience. Dreams, memories, and attention intermingle with anticipation. You understand that the night's influence lingers even as light returns. Habits formed, observations made, and instincts sharpened during darkness persist. Awareness of time, risk, and interdependence remains active, guiding the household through the early hours of day. The gradual illumination outside signals that night has yielded its domain. Shadows retreat. Surfaces that seemed uncertain now reveal texture and shape. Familiar paths reappear. The world transitions, not abruptly, but steadily, from nocturnal caution to daytime clarity. Finally, the household begins coordinated movement. Doors open. Fires are stoked more fully. Animals are tended actively, and tasks that were impossible during darkness are resumed. Life continues, shaped by the patterns, vigilance, and adaptations honed through night. And you, resting at last, have moved through the long, layered night intact. Each hour contributed to endurance, awareness, and preparation. Darkness has been negotiated successfully, providing lessons in observation, patience, and cooperation. Morning promises activity, light, and renewed energy. But it also carries forward the understanding of the night's quiet influence. The night has passed fully now, and you feel the calm that comes with completion. Hours of darkness, cold, and quiet have tested endurance and attention. But the household has met each challenge with vigilance, cooperation, and quiet skill. You sense warmth returning, not only in body but in mind. Even as light grows, the lingering hush reminds you of what was overcome, how every sound, every breath, and every careful movement mattered. Sleep, rest, and wakefulness flowed together seamlessly, intertwined with practical concerns. Observation of animals, attention to fire and embers, and awareness of the environment. Night-shaped perception, refined instincts, and fostered social bonds. Shared warmth, gentle vigilance, and the rhythms of breathing guided experience, teaching both caution and patience. Darkness was a teacher, imposing conditions that the household adapted to naturally, forming habits that would persist long after the first glow of dawn. Now, as the day begins, you feel the soft release of tension. Bodies stretch, muscles relax, and breath deepens without the previous alertness. The air, once heavy and cold, carries faint warmth. Sounds are now layered with recognition and familiarity. You notice the birds, the rustle of straw, and distant human activity as signals of safety and the continuation of life. Night has ended, but its lessons remain embedded in the household, in habits, in awareness. You carry the knowledge of endurance, observation, and cooperation into the new day. Darkness has been survived, vigilance has been honored, and you rest, softly, as the first light unfolds, ready to meet the morning with awareness and ease. Sweet dreams.